Jaron Jarvis channel, Top 20 Scary Stories of the Day from Reddit nosleep. 2018-08-21. Story 1, we were certainly not expecting a second child. 8 weeks ago, my wife and I had our first child, a daughter. Things have been going pretty great since then. All of the horror stories about how hard it is to handle an infant have been greatly exaggerated. Changing diapers is easy. Sure, the baby needs to eat every 2 to 4 hours, but we've been sleeping in shifts and so sleep deprivation hasn't been too problematic. Even when I returned to work, our sister made things pretty easy. Last week was a bit rougher than normal. We had to attend my wife's sister's wedding, and my wife had to go to a bunch of pre-wedding events. As a result, our schedule had a few hiccups and we were both pretty tired by the end of the week. Fortunately, with the weekend coming up, things could get back on track. That Saturday started like the last several Saturdays. I transitioned from the bed to the couch, and went into relaxation mode. My wife was going to do the grocery shopping for the week, and so she loaded the baby into the car seat, said goodbye, and took off for the store. I putzed around the house for a little bit and made some brunch for her for when she returned. After a while I heard the baby start to fuss, and so I made her a bottle, grabbed a rag, picked her up, and set up shop back on the couch. As was a normal routine, she fed, she burped, she fed, she threw up, she fed, and then she fell asleep on my belly while I watched Netflix. My wife got home about an hour later. I had the baby sleeping on my belly, so I had a good excuse not to help out as she came inside, unloaded the groceries, took the baby out of the car seat, and got her set up the pack and play for a nap. She got herself a plate of the food I had prepared earlier and sat down next to me on the couch to eat it. She admonished me for not helping with the groceries and I defended my lack of action by referring to the baby on my belly. She said that she put the baby down after the groceries, and so I could have still helped. I said that didn't make any sense, but, before we could continue our hushed disagreement, we were interrupted by the baby fussing from the pack and play. She gestured to her plate of food, expecting me to get the baby. I gestured to the baby on my belly, expecting her to get the baby. That was when it suddenly clicked in both of our minds that something wasn't right. We only have one baby. We exchanged a confused look before she quickly placed the plate of food on the floor and darted over to the pack and play. So, I know what you're thinking, and it's exactly what I was thinking. My poor wife, in her sleep-deprived state, must have left with an empty car seat and accidentally kidnapped some baby at the store. There's probably a frantic family at Walmart and a police squad on the way. Well, that's not what happened. That would have been way better. She returned with the baby. Our baby. The same baby that was on my belly. We were totally stunned, to say the least. I got up and we compared the two babies. They looked the same, right down to the shape of their stalk bites. They smelled the same. They were wearing the same exact onesie. I tried asking if one of them was an imposter, but neither of them would answer me. One of the babies weighed a few ounces more than the other, but we didn't know the exact weights before, so that doesn't help us. It's been 2 days, and we're both completely stumped. We've just been taking care of them, and they seem to be pretty much identical. There haven't been any Amber Alerts or missing babies mentioned on the news. We haven't told anyone. We don't really know how. I'm especially hesitant to contact the police. I don't want to endanger my family or get anyone in trouble. At the same time, I have no idea what to do. Story 2, Terry's Top 10. You remember a few years ago when Top 10 videos started to get really popular? For a while, it seemed like new channels were popping up one after the other, each trying to be the next sensation. Some became decently popular, most faded into obscurity, and eventually WatchMojo came along and set the standard for the Top 10 format. There was, however, one channel that I've never seen anyone mention, another channel in the sea of countless copycats. Terry's Top 10. I think this channel only ever topped out at a few dozen subscribers, and I suspect most of them were bots. His videos only seemed to get 10 or 15 views apiece, and the comments were filled with typo-riddled advertisements for hot local singles and free in-game currency in whatever the game of the day was. For all I know, I might have been the only human subscriber. I'm not even sure how I found this channel. I think it might have popped up in the recommended videos on another top 10 list. The host of the show, Terry, was a middle-aged man, clean-shaven with a buzz cut to match, and a pair of glasses that might have looked more appropriate in the 70s. He'd sit in front of the camera and ramble on about whatever the video's subject was. There was obviously no script, or if there was, he wasn't good at following it, as his sentences would occasionally trail off, or his lists would be interrupted by some little anecdote. The footage was a little blurry and occasionally shaky, as sometimes the cheap little webcam would slide off of its kickstand. All that aside, there was something endearing and even charming about his videos. This was just some curious suburban dad that had discovered technology that must have seemed space age, and he was excited to use it and share his opinions with the world. So the videos came, one a day, on myriad subjects. Top 10 movies starring Marlon Brando. Top 10 progressive rock albums of the 1970s. Top 10 Oakland Raiders plays. Top 10 heroes of World War II. There was something else a bit off about his videos though. Every video, no matter the subject, would include a mention of Terry's kids. He was always kind of vague with the details, but I guessed that he had 2 boys and a girl, and he'd always tell some little anecdote about them. He'd start off the same way every time, "Now, I'm a good dad, I love my kids," and just the other day, before he kicked into a story involving them. The subject didn't seem to matter either, it had always come back to Terry's kids. Terry loved his kids. The videos continued steadily for a few months until one day he ended one of his lists with a message to the audience. He explained that his marriage was failing, that he'd been creating these videos as a way of coping, and that he'd be attending a custody hearing within a few days. He asked his audience of bots, and myself, to wish him luck. He ended the video by staring directly into the camera and slowly, deliberately reminding us, "I'm a good dad. I love my kids." In this instance, Terry's typical declaration of fatherly love sounded more like a threat. The channel went quiet for a few days while Terry presumably dealt with his custody hearing. When he came back, it was obvious that the hearing had not gone his way. I was startled when I saw the name of his first upload since returning, Top 10 Fucking Whores That Won't Let Me See My Kids. Unnerved, I clicked the video. Terry appeared haggard, his normally shaven face now sporting a 5 o'clock shadow, his well-kempt hair messy and out of place. He looked positively manic, his eyes wide, either staring daggers into the camera or darting this way and that. This wasn't so much a list as it was a rant, blaming everyone from the courts to God to then President Obama for taking his kids away. Most of all, he blamed his, now ex-wife, in a tirade I can't stand to repeat here. One by one the videos came. Top 10 judges that need to eat a bullet. Top 10 divorce lawyers that aren't worth shit. In each of these videos were rants more frenzied and panicked than the last. Unsettlingly, they all ended in the same way: "I'm a good dad. I love my kids." After a few days of this, the channel went quiet again. A week later, it returned with a new video: Top 10 Easy Targets. I clicked on the video, already recoiling from my computer screen as I expected the worst. No longer filmed on the webcam, this video looked to be filmed on a smartphone. The clip was of a house in the dead of night, surrounded by trees, the only sound being Terry's heavy breathing, and the only motion being the slight shake of the camera as he fumbled with the phone. As he filmed, a light flicked on in the house, and a silhouette appeared at the window, standing still for a moment before apparently noticing Terry's presence and frantically shutting the light back off. The video ended. Hours later, another video: Top 10 Ways to Hide the Bodies. Mercifully, there was no picture in this one, but that didn't spare me from the horrific audio, sounds of a knife cutting into something over and over, sounds of meat being sliced and tendons being snapped. Over and over through the video, a voice mumbled, "I'm a good dad. I love my kids." The channel went quiet for another day, before coming back with another questionable video titled Top 10 Ways to Evade Law Enforcement. Again, no picture, just heavy breathing as muffled footsteps and the crackles of police radios could be heard in the distance. At this point, I considered contacting the authorities, but I was stopped by the realization that I didn't know where Terry was based. I wasn't sure if he was even in the US. At a loss as to who to call and what to tell them, I let it go and reluctantly decided to continue following this travesty. A few more days of silence came, then a new video with a new title entirely unlike the ones before. Top 10 Wives That Forced Me to Do This. I didn't want this, I didn't want this for us, you made me do this. In the video was Terry, facing a wall, having a one-sided conversation with a voice only he could hear. God damn it, Karen, I didn't want this. You did this, you forced my hand, you knew how much the kids mean to me. You tried to take them away from me. I offered you money, I offered you whatever you wanted. They're gone now. The lights of my life, and they're gone. I hope you're happy. I'm a good dad. I love my kids. The last line gave me a chill, and I hoped they had been taken into protective custody, not anything else. Soon, another video. Top 10 Kids That I Miss So Much. I'm so sorry, your dad's a murderer, your dad's a fucking murderer. Terry, looking just as manic as ever, staring at the camera, sobbing. In between sobs he managed to squeak out apologies. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never wanted this, I'm sorry. Finally, one last video. After all this, as horrified as I was somehow once again taken aback by the title Top 10. That was it. No description, no lengthy rant in the title, just Top 10. I reluctantly clicked the video. Terry sat in a darkened room, the only light coming from a television behind him. The picture quality was too poor to make out most of the details, but it appeared to be set to a local news channel. I could hear the reporter say she was live on the scene and that police were closing in on the suspect. Terry looked towards the camera. Top 10. He turned towards the TV. Top 10. He reached for a nearby pistol, loaded the magazine, and racked it. Top 10. Footsteps could be heard outside the room. Top 10. Another voice. He's in here. At that, Terry opened his eyes wide and screamed. Top 10, 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 top 10. Banging on the door. I'm a good dad. More yelling. Open the fucking door. I love my kids. More banging. More yelling. Finally, just as the door looked as if it were about to give way, the video ended. That was the last video from Terry's Top 10. I looked in the news for any stories relating to a police standoff with a wanted murderer, but found nothing. It was as if everyone involved had simply vanished off the face of the earth. The channel didn't last much longer. It was taken down soon after the final video was posted, not because of the content, but because of a copyright strike against one of his earlier videos wherein he had played a favorite song. To the rest of the world, it seemed that the story of Terry and his family either hadn't happened or didn't matter. As time went by, I gradually forgot about the tragedy I'd witnessed. Until today. A new channel in the recommended list. Terry's Kids. On that channel, a sole video. A 10 seconds clip of 3 small skeletons in a ditch. A simple title: I'm a good dad. I love my kids. Story 3, avoid old couples who rent out cottages in the countryside. I recently rented out a small cottage in the countryside for a week. Initially I was going with a friend, but the bastard cancelled last minute. I decided to go on my own because I thought it'd be nice to get away for a bit. The cottage was semi-detached with the owners living in the other house. The cottage was surrounded by woodland and was up a dirt track from the village. On arrival the owners seemed like a sweet elderly couple and the cottage was lovely. I just knew this was going to be a wonderful week. Fuck me, was I wrong? The owners greeted me when I arrived. Overall they were very kind, but seemed oddly disappointed when I told them my friend couldn't make it. I spent the rest of the day hanging around the cottage after the long drive up. Everything seemed fairly normal. The first night I went to bed quite early at 9 so I could get a good night's sleep before I went out the next day. Not 10 minutes after I'd got into bed, I heard the most disturbing noise from next door. The owners were having sex. Yes, I know it's their house and they can do what they want, but the last thing I want to hear on holiday is loud geriatric intercourse. They made hooting and screeching noises. It didn't sound human. This shit went on all night. I was exhausted, and I hadn't even done anything yet. I later confronted the landlady about it. She wasn't happy. "You know I could hear you last night, doing you know what?" She replied with, "Well, you can join in next time if you want," love followed by a loud cackle. "Can you please just keep it down a bit?" I asked politely. She then gave me the most hate-filled look I've ever seen from anyone in my life. Baring her crooked yellow teeth, she didn't say anything, she didn't even blink. I slowly backed away into the cottage, but she stayed there, in the same position, with the same facial expression for hours. At first I assumed she was just having a moment. Old people do that, right? After 8 hours, when it was beginning to get dark, the husband arrived back home, picked up his wife and carried her back into the house, like it was nothing. Not long after I called it a night. Just when I was drifting off, a dark figure emerged out of my cupboard. I assumed I was just seeing things until it sat down on my bed and revealed itself to be the landlord. I was so shocked I couldn't even utter a word. He began rubbing my thigh while looking down at me with large grin stretched from ear to ear. "You upset my darling wife," he said. I was still speechless, unable to move. "She's very sensitive at the moment, but don't worry, the mating season is over now and you can have a decent night's sleep." He got up, bent over me and kissed me on the forehead, as if I was his child. "Sweet dreams," he softly spoke as he walked back into the cupboard. I was paralyzed by fear, staring into nothing all night until the sun rose. When daylight finally arrived, I summoned up what courage was left in me to check the cupboard. I opened it and of course there was no one in there. It was clear that there was a door connecting the two cottages. It was either I leave and never look back, or I go and check out their cottage and find out what the fuck has been going on. I chose the latter. I waited until I was sure the owners were gone, and when I hesitantly pushed open the door, to my surprise, the house seemed perfectly normal. I explored the whole cottage apart from the basement, which was locked. I was disappointed and relieved at the same time, and I decided it was probably time to leave and never come back, until the front door opened. I scrambled behind the couch and watched as the landlord carried his wife, who seemed distressed and was panting heavily, and placed her on the floor. The woman lay still on the floor until a hand burst out of her mouth. A humanoid creature, slightly smaller than the average man, crawled out of her skin. It was scrawny, sopping wet, with hairless, light grey skin and vacant eyes. I was revolted and bewildered, but that was nothing compared to how I felt when this creature proceeded to give birth. It shrieked as the baby creature fell out of it. The landlord picked it up, walked to the basement door, unlocked it and took the creature down. What did this have to do with me though? All my questions were answered when the landlord came back up. The landlord walked back up from the basement, and behind him were two other creatures who I assume were the couple's other offspring. "There is only one person staying with us, so only one of you will get your skin today," he announced. The creatures began arguing over who would get their human skin first, until the landlord exclaimed enough, and grabbed the slightly larger one and told him, "You will kill him, skin him and prepare his insides for your mother. She will need a feast tonight." The landlord and his son entered into my cottage as the landlady and the other creature disappeared into the basement. At that moment I made my escape. I ran out the front door, got in my car and drove. I heard a deafening shriek from the cottage and looked in my rearview mirror to see the landlord standing dead still, watching my car as it pulled out. It makes me feel sick thinking about it. If they didn't act so fucking strange, they would have succeeded. That thing would have been walking in my skin right now as I write this. I go away for a relaxing week in the countryside and instead I get this. Needless to say, I will not be taking a vacation for a very long time. Story 4. Hey, does anybody remember Yvette Thorms on YouTube? I have a lot of presence on social media, especially Twitter and Instagram. I grew my account a little bit. It just consisted of my life and selfies and vacations, sort of like a blog. One time a post of me and my friend got on the explore page, and it made me feel extra cocky. I was younger and a lot dumber at the time. I thought being popular was everything that mattered, kind of like most high school sophomores. That was when I met my friend Chance's friend. Her name was Yvette and she had a significant following on all of her social medias. About 40k on Instagram and 68k on YouTube. I'm not sure about her Twitter, I don't even know if she had one. Point being, she was starting to become a thing. Yvette Jamie Thorms was her full name. Since we both had a similar dream of becoming a YouTube sensation, we hit it off pretty quickly. Sometimes we'd talk far into the night and I would be almost like a zombie at school from the lack of sleep. Yvette went to a private, all-girls school. The friend that introduced me to her had once went there before coming to mine, and that was how they knew each other. One day we decided to go meet for a movie. It was good fun, finally meeting my best friend, if you could even call her that. We went for ice cream afterwards and headed back to her house. About a year and a half into our friendship, she FaceTimed me. She was freaking out, but smiling so wide, and she excitedly announced that she'd hit 100k subscribers on YouTube. We celebrated that night by both making brownies while FaceTiming, and then planning a sleepover for that upcoming Saturday night. Her channel only grew from there, and so did mine. I was only at about 50k, which was pretty good, but minuscule compared to her feats. She was verified quickly and suddenly her channel exploded. She was the next beauty guru, it seemed. Her average views were anywhere between 40,000 and sometimes she'd even break 1 million views. Her most popular video was her makeup do's and don'ts. It got about 5 million views. Videos became a daily occurrence and we talked less. We still talked, of course, but she had to balance her YouTube career with school and a part-time job, so we didn't have much time for each other anymore. We weren't necessarily distant, I don't think. One night, however, I couldn't sleep. It was almost 2 a.m. on a Tuesday night and my phone went off, indicating I'd received a text. When I checked it, it was Yvette. She asked if I could FaceTime. I didn't want to deny her since we didn't really get to FaceTime much anymore, so I fixed my hair and blinked a couple times so I'd look more awake. Then I picked up her call. She looked panicked. I didn't know what was wrong at first, but when I looked in her eyes, I could see that she was holding her phone in front of an open laptop screen with the brightness way up. I couldn't see much, but it looked like a long, detailed email. Yvette said that she was afraid to continue her YouTube channel. I asked her what she was talking about, since she was nearing 600k. She told me, in these exact words, "These government workers keep threatening me." She explained how ever since she was verified, it was like she was bound to a contract with her soul. Anonymous emails flooded in, claiming that if she did this task or that task, she would get a large flood of subscribers and get more popularity. Yvette tried it, and it worked. It was why she was growing so fast and getting so many views. She told me that YouTube was killing her. That it's all fake, Kenzie, it's all fake, she said. She began to cry. I think I'm going to get in trouble for telling you. Please just quit before you get popular. Please. She begged me for 10 minutes to stop uploading, to make new accounts and make them private. I told her I would, but asked her to elaborate. Here's the weird stuff she told me about, and since I don't know her exact quotes, I just made bullet points. She said that one of her tasks was to perform a seance. She said it didn't work, and nothing happened, but she soon exploded. She told me that in exchange for news outlets to talk about her age and success, she had to scratch some Latin phrase into her wrist. She did it, but didn't know what it meant. She told me that the emails were threatening her because she stopped doing what they said. Yvette said that since she told me, she was going to die. I didn't believe her at first. It seemed so silly, right? Like she was recording and pranking me or something for her channel. But as I was mid-sentence, her FaceTime disconnected. I began to feel dizzy, like there were weights on my head, crushing my skull and my brain. Instead of ending up back on our texts, like what always happens when you crash or leave a call, I ended up on my main screen with all of my contacts. Her name wasn't anywhere. It should have been right at the top. She was the person I most recently was texting. I checked my contacts, right down to why her number was gone from my phone. I just thought it was a glitch, so I went to go back and enter her number in my phone. I had memorized it. I was in the middle of typing it in and then, I forgot it. I know it was memorized. Thankfully I'd written it down a sticky note, so I typed it in. It told me that the number was not registered. Maybe I typed it in wrong? I tried it over and over again, and when the same response came up, I decided just to DM her on Instagram. I searched up her username, it was just Yvette.Jamie. However, nothing popped up. A couple other accounts did, though, Yvette.James, YvetteJamie, and some others. I checked all the related usernames, and none were her. But then I realized I didn't know her username. I began to panic, threw my phone down, and hid under the covers. My headache faded pretty quickly. I checked her YouTube, her Tumblr, everything, and she was just gone. She disappeared. Her accounts and her phone number didn't exist anymore. It seemed like I'd forgotten so much about her. I didn't sleep that night, but I did find out a pattern. All types of technology gave me headaches, unbearable crushing pains on the top of my head. As soon as I looked away from my laptop, phone, or TV screen, the aching pains would just go away. In a minute or two I'd feel just fine. I also realized that the more I used technology, the more I'd forget about her. What's her favorite ice cream? What's her birthday? I can't even remember her voice anymore. I went to school and she wasn't there. Nobody questioned her absence. Chance and I had math together, so I figured I'd mention Yvette to her. Chance looked at me blankly, raising her eyebrow and asking me who Yvette was. She had an older brother who went to our school. I asked him if his sister was doing okay. Maybe he remembered having a sister instead of her name. He laughed and told me he didn't have a sister. I'm writing this before I forget her completely and I'm saving it so I never forget. I don't know what the hell happened to her, but I'm so afraid. Her own family doesn't even know she exists anymore. So please, does anyone here remember Yvette Thorms? That Twitter moment about her back in July? And, future me, if you're reading this, Yvette existed. You may not remember her, but she was your best friend. Please tell me someone remembers her. Story 5, can someone help me with the 24 rules? Is anyone else in the same shithole I'm in? I only have 17. I think I only have 6 more days to figure out the remaining 7. If you don't know what I'm talking about, let me explain, maybe you'll find out that we're in the same situation. If you are in the same boat, could you help? Or maybe I'd even be helping you. Anyways, I should probably start off with a little bit about me. I don't know, I've never written out what's happening to me before. To be honest, I created this account a few days ago just so I could post this here in a last-ditch effort for advice and help. So, starting off, I'm a 19-year-old living on my own. I have a small apartment, which means I live near other people, which means there's quite a bit of noise. However, it's not like there are arguments and wild parties every night. That's why it took me so long to get concerned. Please bear with my story. I'm a 19-year-old female and I live in a small apartment complex. My neighbors are relatively quiet, and I don't think any of the residents here have ever gotten a noise complaint before. I used to have a cat, but sadly she passed away about 2 days after this shit started happening. I mention her because maybe she could explain some of the earlier situations away. So, for about 80% of the stuff I'm going to be telling you, my cat, Tinkerbell, isn't going to be mentioned. I'm also not one to immediately chalk it up to paranormal/stalker experiences. I'm not paranoid, and most of the time I try to keep a level head. I don't get nervous a lot, and I don't panic easily. But this isn't in my head. This isn't paranoia. This is a real situation, and no matter how much I tell myself that this is silly, it won't go away. I don't know if this is paranormal. Just deeming it something paranormal makes it already seem not possible, or that this is just another fictional story made by some bored teen writer in their room. Please believe me. I'm sorry for the long introduction. I think the first time I noticed something off was when I was cooking a pot of mac and cheese. I was turning the flame down a bit, since the mac was almost done cooking, and I started hearing this sound. Not very specific, I know. It sounded like a plane when it was landing. The sound was a low, droll, mechanical growl. When a plane hits the runway and the engines start roaring really lowly. The sound right after that. When the engines stop, and you can just hear that mechanical roar coming from underneath your feet, the sound so low you can feel the vibrations in the floor. That's what I heard. I know an airplane sound might not be scary, but when you're not on an airplane, or anywhere near intense mechanics, it is. I'll try to find the closest sound I can and put it in this post, if I can find it. The actual sound I hear is too low for my phone to pick up, I guess. Anyways, I was cooking mac and cheese and the sound started really quietly. It was just a low, dull, monotone note. I thought at first that maybe it was just an old machine in the basement working, but after an hour of it droning on and on, I realized that probably wasn't the case. The sound started to fluctuate, almost like an animal growling. It started to sound like creaking metal whenever it growled. I called the front of my complex and asked what was going on, and they said that no one had called in to complain about a similar sound, and that no workers could hear it. I don't know. Maybe it could have just been my ears ringing. The sound eventually grew louder and louder, to the point where I could feel the metallic growling in my chest. I could feel the vibrations in my wooden floor, and I could barely sleep that night. I don't know how I went to sleep at first, but after this, I didn't sleep for days. I heard a heavy, low breath from the other side of my bedroom door. It wasn't a quick breath, it was like someone was slowly emptying their lungs, like when a pipe is hissing. Except it almost sounded human, but not quite. Something was off about it. It was like a sigh, but slower and more forced. I'm not sure if I explained it well. It was pitch black and I don't leave any lights on, so I couldn't see if anything was walking in the hallway. It could have been a robber, to be honest. I have no idea. But it didn't sound human. I don't know how to explain it. It was just too low, and too out of place to be human. I grabbed my cat, who sleeps on the pillow next to me, and held her all night. I didn't fall back asleep. Instead, I lie in bed with my eyes wide open, breathing out whenever the breaths outside my door breathed in, and breathing in when it breathed out. I wanted to hear the breaths, to see if I could figure out what it was. When my alarm rang for work, the breathing wasn't there. I guess it had faded throughout the night. I got ready for work in complete silence. I left my room and walked to the kitchen. This is the moment I realized it couldn't have been robbers. The moment I opened my door and left my room, I heard that faint, mechanical hum. It was so silent I almost didn't catch it. But it was there. I didn't know what to do, so I just went on with my daily routine. I emptied my dishwasher and started to put them away, the low hum vibrating the bowls subtly. I stacked my bowls in towers of 5, since my cupboards were only tall enough to hold 5 bowl stacks, and noticed that the hum got louder as I added each bowl onto the stack. I was terrified. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up and Tinkerbell sat perched on the edge of the counter, her head hanging low and eyes fixated and darting subtly to her left, almost as if she was looking for something she saw in the corner of her eye. I felt a right pressure beneath my shoulder blades. It was a building pressure, like when you blow air into a balloon and the latex gets tighter. As I was going to put the stack in the cupboard, my hands began to shake and I felt uncomfortable and watched, violated, even. I set the bowl down and placed my hands against the counter, feeling a panic attack creeping up on me as I tried to ignore the mechanical growl. The pressure had spread to my hands and I could feel the pressure in my knuckles building up as my fingers went numb. I paused. Tinkerbell chirped at me as I heard her tail swish across some papers I had left on the counter. I took a bowl off of the stack. The hum got quieter. I took another bowl off of the stack. It seemed to retreat from the kitchen, seeping back into the hallway, the sound pulling back, seeming to drag across the walls now. I took the third bowl from the stack. The hum returned to its soft but present state. That's how I found the first rule. Only stack in twos. Later, after this whole incident had happened, I quickly found out that I had to add another row of cabinets to my kitchen, since I had almost quadrupled my stacks of plates and bowls. I used to stack in threes and fives, and now I could only stack in two. I could only stack cups in two, plates in two, teacups in two, pear spoons in two, forks in two, have two napkins in a napkin holder at a time. My kitchen was a mess and difficult to explain to anyone who came over. Because of this, I quickly stopped having people over. I can't reach out to anyone in the real world about this. I've spent every day since then triple checking my stacks, worried that I accidentally added another cup, or that I accidentally put two pairs of forks in the same spot, instead of just two. I won't risk messing up again. The first time I forgot to stack two plates, I had stacked five, like I normally do. The hum didn't get louder. It's like the hum only warned me the first time I didn't know the rule, but after that, it expected me to know better. I went to sleep with Tinkerbell once again, and I had almost forgotten about the strange mechanical hum and breathing, probably just chalking it up to my imagination, or too tired from work to bother remembering it. I had turned all of the lights off, fed Tinkerbell, and tucked myself in. I was about to drift off to sleep when I heard the low breathing, louder this time. It huffed, its breath rattled, like a sick person who had phlegm in their throat. My throat tightened. Then I heard what I thought was scratching beneath the door. I would say it was Tinkerbell, except for the fact that these scratch sounds weren't fast and light like a cat at a door. There was a dull thunk, like someone had stabbed a wooden door with a knife. And then it just dragged. It just dragged, like a murderer dragging a butcher knife across a kitchen table. When I woke up the next morning, I came into the kitchen to see a stack of plates on the counter. A stack of two plates, with the other two shattered on the floor. The shards of green-stained porcelain laid out in a jagged 24 shape. I've never messed up that rule since then. But I've messed up others. And this learning the rules process has continued on until I've gotten to where I am now, 17 rules. It was a strange process of trial and error that would take way too long to explain. I'll list them here in case someone going through the same thing as me is missing the ones that I have. Always stack in twos. Hit the sink with your fork 3 times before putting plates in it. Prick your fingertip before taking a shower. Drop a drop of hot wax onto your forearm before blowing a candle out. You have to light a candle once a day. I have a red patch on my arm from where these drops have landed. Open the door a crack and welcome in any visitors before going to sleep. You can never sleep with your door shut. No other living creature can sleep in your home but you. All knives must be arranged, splayed, on the kitchen table in order from smallest to largest, or sharpest to dullest, alternating each day. You cannot, and will not go to confession. Yes, I am Christian. You must break off, not cut off, the white parts of your nails and keep them in a box. Always keep the box upside down, in a closet. Paranormal movies, articles, YouTube videos, books, or items may not be kept or played in the house. I'm not sure if I'm breaking this rule right now. Blink 6 times in a row every hour. Fish, bread, and wine may not be kept together in the same room. Don't look at the door if there is scratching or breathing. Alcohol and drugs aren't allowed. Learn that one the hard way. You must keep, at least, one bedroom window open at night. Please tell me someone else is going through this. Please help me figure out the last 7 rules. The scratches and the growls are getting louder each night, and I swear I heard a low voice whisper 8 2 days ago. And then a lower voice whisper 7 last night. If you know anything, please comment it below or contact me in any way. I'm sorry if this seems like I'm not worrying, or I'm not scared, but I'm just trying to keep a level head so I can be on the lookout for clues and patterns. I am terrified. I just don't know how to write it out to show you that. I need to keep a level head, and going into detail on what I thought and how I felt might just cause me to lose my mind. What happens when the deeply unsettling mechanical droning, that jumbled, emotionless, breathy echo that seeps into every crevice of the building and never seems to fade, reaches 1. Story 6, the bus stop. I stepped out of the warmth of the apartment complex into the cold winds on the empty sidewalk. The only source of light were a few street lights, emitting weak, yellow light. I turned right and started walking down to the road towards the bus stop when I saw the bus I was supposed to take speeding past the waiting benches. Fuck, I thought to myself. The next bus wouldn't leave until an hour, so I figured I'd have to wait in the apartment to keep myself from freezing to death. I backed to the complex door, only to realize that the keys that I thought to be in my pocket was missing. Did I drop them on the short stretch I walked? I retraced my steps but found nothing. I looked through every pocket twice, but the keys weren't there. I must have left them at home. You've got to be kidding me. How did I forget my keys when they were right on my bed next to my jacket? And as if being locked out wasn't bad enough, I felt water drops hitting my bare head. Could this get any worse? I pulled up my hood and started walking down the road towards the bus station. At least I could get cover from the glass shelter. When I stepped under the metal roof of the bus shelter, I immediately noticed that the digital timetable was out of order and displayed the message, "Out of order, check timetable." I turned to the printed timetables to the left of me and looked under my bus's number. I checked the timetable for Saturday. Next bus would arrive in, fuck me, 2 hours? Then I remembered that weekend buses only depart every 2 hours. Now I would have to sit here, under a dark bus shelter, on a dark road, in the outskirts of the suburbs, an hour from the inner city. Great. At least my phone was fully charged. I put my headphones in, sat down on a bench and opened YouTube. Here's wasting 2 hours on absolutely nothing. Snap. It was loud enough to be heard even with my headphones on. I pulled out one of my earbuds. I couldn't see anything. It was very dark, so obviously, it sent a shiver down my spine, but it's nothing I couldn't shake off as superstition, so I put my earbud back in and continued watching my video. Snap. There it was again, but this time it was louder. Snap. The sounds of sticks snapping were getting closer, and louder. Then a figure stepped out of the dark. I jumped. It was a man in a suit. Sorry if I scared you there, it's just that it's so dark, I can barely see anything, he apologized. Yeah, no problem. It's just that it's dark, and I haven't seen anyone around, so I'm kinda jumpy, I replied. Understandable, he said as he sat down on the bench next to me. Again, sorry if I scared you. Nah, it's all right, I said. I then marked the end of the conversation by putting my earbuds back in and turned back to my phone. I checked the time on the top of the screen, an hour until the bus would arrive. Geez, time's slow when you really don't need it to be. I checked the phone's time again. 40 minutes to go. But then, as I was about to switch back to my videos, I noticed something in the corner of my eye. The man in the suit that was still sitting next to me, had his head turned towards me. At first, I couldn't make out what he was looking at, but then I realized he was staring straight at me. What the fuck do I do? This creepy guy in a suit is sitting just 3 meters from me, staring right on me. I don't dare to look at him, but I just know that he knows I notice him staring. And it's making the whole situation more uncomfortable. At last, I swallow my fears and I turn to him. Is there something you want? I asked him, trying to sound with as much authority as possible. He didn't answer. He just kept staring at me, with dark eyes. Look, whatever you want, just tell me, will you? I said, again trying to sound angry, but this time it just came out with a nervous, cracked voice. He opened his mouth as if to say something. But it wasn't natural. His mouth opened way too much, and inside of it, there was nothing. Just darkness. I stood up and stumbled back. I couldn't speak. I just watched in horror as he slowly stood up and started walking towards me. And as I continued to stumble backwards, I saw how his mouth began closing again. And suddenly, he stopped. Then, his mouth moved. It started spreading into an unholy smile, from ear to ear. And I could hear a deep, raw laughter bubbling up from inside of him as he began to move towards me again. This time, he was faster. He began running towards me, and I just dodged him, sending him flying through one of the glass panes on the shelter. It broke with a huge crash and I backed up, slowly. I expected him to stand up again, but he didn't. All of a sudden everything just went black and I fell to the ground. I didn't wake up until the bus driver was standing over me. He looked both concerned and angry. "What are you doing, kid? Are you all right?" he asked me. I just nodded slowly. "Look, are you going to go on the bus or not? Because I got a tight schedule to run here." "Yeah." The bus driver helped me up and helped me on board the bus. "I'm not sure what you got yourself into, but you seem all right." "Do you know who broke the glass pane?" he asked me. "No. It was broken when I got here. I must have had low blood sugar or something. All I remember is passing out. The bus was empty except for me and the driver." "I'm going to believe you, so there's no need for me to call the cops or nothing. Just tell me which stop you're heading to and I can tell you over the speakers when we get there," he said. "End of the line," I said as I sat down in view of the driver's mirror. "The end of the line." As the bus pulled out of the station, I looked out the window. And only a few meters from the bus stop, I could see a man in a suit, just staring back at me. And I thanked God that I got out of there in time. I looked back to ask the driver how long it would take, and in the mirror, I could see him looking back at me. With dark eyes and with a smile that grew ear from ear. Story 7, Wax Man. "It's been 4 months, huh?" Dennis asked me as he poured the beer over the edge of the 5th-floor balcony. It splattered on the concrete next to some girls waiting for their ride. They yelled up at us and he yelled back. They clutched their bags and shuffled further away, off the curb, across the dark lot. It was a hot and sticky night and my beer sweat between my fingers. I leaned my back against the railing. The party inside was dying down. The people were deciding who they were going to sleep with that night, holding on to each other's arms. I took a pull from my beer. "Do you think campus is calming down?" "I don't think we'll ever be actually calm, but yeah," he said. Dennis watched the girls in the parking lot, their edges blurring into the night. "He just gets into your skin. That's how he does it. He melts his way into you, through your pores, man. Then from the inside he sucks you up till you're nothing. Gone. For good." He cranked back and hurled the green bottle as far as he could out across the parking lot. It spun in the night sky and then disappeared into the darkness. And then the quick smashing sound as it shattered along the asphalt, a green streak of glass under the lot's yellow lights. I finished my beer and handed him the bottle to shot put. It was nearing 3 in the morning. I didn't miss Jess. But I thought about her a lot. Thought about where she may be if she was anywhere at all. If she still had that ugly lip ring, the one she got with Derek, this tan-skinned film student with holes in his ears. When I called her out on it she told me that only pussies got jealous. At this party now, though, was a different girl. Her name was Claire and she seemed to be into me and she was easy, but if I took too long getting there the goods would spoil. She was the self-destructive type of girl that'd sleep around until she felt shitty about it and then would freak out and cut off all her hair, a cleansing, only to repeat herself later. Talk about reincarnation. The cutoff was coming soon so I'd have to hurry, get her right there on the edge and then push her off. The last before the haircut. That always held some sort of glamour to me. The same way I was Jess' last boyfriend. But the odds didn't look good. She was drunk and petting Derek's shoulder as he talked about film versus digital and other such nonsense. "Is Derek going to fuck Claire?" I asked. "She has a say in it too," Dennis said and he lit a joint. I shot him a look and he shook the match out and blew the smoke out over the railing. Think of a cross between the Wendigo and La Llorona. Dude under your bed moaning and crying. That shit's spooky, man. "Can we please stop talking about this?" I asked. Going through it once was bad enough. "Oh please." "You were fed up with her." He looked at me. I looked at the ground. His eyes always reminded me of my father's. "Yeah, so maybe I'd had enough of her. Doesn't mean I wanted her to what? I don't know. That. What was it like? Seeing her like that?" I watched Claire sit on Derek's lap. He traced his finger along her back and took her drink away from her. He didn't want her to out of it. He twirled his finger through her long blonde hair. I opened another bottle and turned to rest my elbows on the rail. Dennis and I looked out. At first it was scary and then it was. I don't know. I felt like I understood something. Dennis offered me a hit from his joint, but I turned it down. I was already pretty drunk. The big question is whether or not he's a bad guy, Dennis said. When he took another drag, the orange tip lit up his face. The balcony light hadn't worked in months, so we were in darkness with the light of the party behind us and the light of Tallahassee in front. Me or him? I joked. Oh, you're shit. That's no question, Dennis laughed. I'm trying to defend the wax man. Yeah. You're done for. Do you think Jess was fooling around with Derek? I asked. You ask that a lot. I nodded my head. I knew that answer already. I thought of her in the tub. Do you think Derek's a better guy than me? I asked. And when the question left me, I felt my stomach drop. Like I had accidentally dropped a fragile box I had been carrying for some time. What? I don't know. I sipped my beer and tossed it, still full, spiraling out a galaxy of foam into the night. The white of it all curved and spread and then rained down. I don't think either of you guys care about Claire, Dennis said. Why should we? I asked. When I got home it was 3:45. I made my way to my room. I lived in a student housing, 1 bathroom 1 bedroom near the top of a dingy apartment complex. The thought of Claire fucking Derek that night made me upset. I felt beat out by him again. And I thought of Jess. I lay in bed and thought of having sex with her and thought of how we were only together when she wanted to be and how she'd dump me and then miss me and then use me and then dump me. That was my samsara, my wheel of existence. I was reincarnated in her sheets and then died in mine. It happened for years. I started to get mad. Mad at myself and at her and at Derek. But when I thought of her, crumpled white and dripping in the tub, something felt okay. Like a justice was done. I kicked off my shoes and took off my jeans. My window faced the emergency light of the apartment adjacent, so at night the room is always a dim orange glow. The beer in me started upsetting my stomach and I could taste that buttery film in my mouth. I listened to the air conditioner drone on, but when it stopped a new sound took its place. It was the stifled sound of a grown man crying. I looked towards my door, orange in the dim. I didn't have any roommates. I turned to my side and peered out through the blinds of my window. On several occasions I watched couples scream and drunk guys fight and homeless people meander. One time Jess and I had sex with the blinds open. It was her idea. I got nervous and quit early. But now, out there, the only thing I saw was a sick dog limp across the street. The crying went on a little harder. But then it sounded clearer. From my room. Under my bed. I set my back straight against the mattress and turned towards the edge. I closed my eyes. What did I do? I asked. The crying went on heavier. Wheezing too. It sounded like it was trying to hold its hand over its mouth the way I did as a kid when I would cry in class and get all embarrassed. Why are you here? I asked again. There was a pause. Some quick breaths between shaking lips. I turned over and pulled the blankets around me. With my ear pressed against the pillow I could still hear him under there, trying to calm himself down, trying not to cry anymore. Crying as though he carried with him every thought and desire of every darkly wrapped self. You should go, I said, and I was struck with the familiarity of hearing that in the air above a bed. Although instead of me whispering, okay, and easing out of Jess' bed, I heard the man whimper. Don't be in here in the morning, I said. And the man was quiet. When I woke up my stomach felt sick and tangled. I hurried to my bathroom and started puking out thick heavy strands of white. They splattered along the inside of the toilet and looked like hard webs. My lips looked caked and hard and glossy. The cracks between my teeth were filled and my face felt oily. I wanted to puke more, so I took off all of my clothes and sat in my bathtub with my knees pulled in. I lay down in the tub naked to rest my stomach. But then the image of Jess flashed across my mind and I panicked. I scrambled out of the tub and locked the bathroom door. At the base of the door I felt drained and closed my eyes. When I woke up my skin stuck to the wood, and when I tried to stand a thick goop of white was left behind, dripping down, coagulating in the space between under the door and the floor, only it was more skin-colored than white. I stared at it for a long time. It looked like a puddle of grease or oil that hardened overnight. It smelled sour. I thought of Claire waking up in Derek's arms. And I thought of Derek inside of Jess. And then I thought of candles. Lots and lots of candles with flickering flames. I felt the man's presence behind the shower curtain. And slowly a silhouette formed to complement the feeling. It came in like a rain cloud, darker and darker until his edges were sharp and defined. He was tall with broad shoulders. And just above the shower curtain the top of his head peeked out, white and hairless. He stood there in silence. "What happens next?" I asked. And he started sobbing, heavy, loud grown man sobs. I saw his silhouette bend, cupping his face in his hands. The shower curtain bulged where his head brushed. I was backed against the door. My hand was on the knob but it wouldn't turn. I wondered how Jess' final moments were. I felt the hot wax drip down my throat like mucus. I coughed it up on the floor, the stickiness of it bridging the roof of my mouth and making me gag more. The man kept on crying loudly. And then it tumbled out of me like that fragile box I had dropped earlier, only now its contents spilled out. The reason why Jess fucked Derek regularly. The reason why I knew and never said anything. The reason why I was so disappointed in myself. Weakness. Cowardice. Shame. All of the above, all wrapped up in my one plea of, take Derek instead. And the man cried even louder and nodded his head like he knew all along. Like he knew I was going to say that. And then his silhouette slowly lowered and melted away, clogging the drain of the tub, hardening the curtains. And when his presence left I felt lightheaded and I slumped back against the door and felt my eyes water until I blinked them away and toppled over to the side, unconscious. I don't know how long I was out, but when I woke up I had 8 missed calls from Dennis. And there was banging on my front door. When I shambled over and opened it, chest stained with hardened white, lips crusty, there was Dennis, wide-eyed. "Did you hear? Did you hear what happened to Derek?" Story 8, my mother did everything to protect us. I never knew my mother. Not exactly in the she abandoned us kind of way. She raised us, fed us, helped us with homework, all the normal mother things. But I never actually knew her. She had little to no trace around our house. All interests and signs of life came from either me and my brother or my father. My mother had her personal items, but they were limited to clothing and a couple of forget-me-not boxes in her closet. I found them one day while playing hide-and-seek with my brother. The boxes contained a couple of high school portraits and pressed flowers, but that was it. In my younger years, I never realized just how much I didn't know about my mom. I didn't know her favorite ice cream flavor, the music she enjoyed, or even the names of her parents. We never got to interact with her family and they surely never interacted with us. All holidays were spent either with no extended family or with my father's family. But, once again, as a kid and eventually a teen who only knew one way, I never questioned it too much. I didn't want to bug my mother about it in fear she would become upset. She was always a pretty happy-go-lucky person. You'd never guess she hid anything behind her warming smile and bubbly voice. She unexpectedly passed away just weeks after I started my senior year of college. I came home for a week and we had a nice funeral for her. Simple and classy, as my mother always was. The attendees consisted mostly of people from my father's family. When I asked him if he was able to contact my mother's family at all, he just shook his head and said he couldn't find a single person from her family. I found that unsettling. It was one thing for me and my brother to not know a lot, but for my father to know nothing as well. Her own husband had the bare information about her. I eventually asked what he did know about Mom and gave me a couple of facts and interests they shared. Anything beyond her favorite animal and the town she was supposedly from, there wasn't much you could scrap up about her. She took a lot with her to the grave. Or so I thought. Years later, my father decided to move. With me and my brother in our own places, his home had become too big for one person to live in. He told us before he left, he wanted to have a garage sale for all the junk him and my mother stored in the attic along with the boxes in the basement. I agreed to clean out the attic while my brother would take the basement. Our attic was somewhere we just never really touched, like any other household. I especially did my best to avoid it due to the large sums of spiders just chilling up there, but figured I was old enough now to kill a few spiders. I entered the attic climbing the shady feeling ladder, pulled down from the ceiling. Everything creaked no matter where I stepped, so I mumbled a quiet sorry to anyone downstairs and began making my way through the junk. Most of what I first encountered was what you'd expect from an attic: old toys me and my brother played with, some boxes of ill-fitting clothes, and some china from my grandmother that my father never really cared for. I was sifting through old trinkets and unwanted birthday gifts when I came across an old, small dresser. It could have been classified as an end table, except it had multiple drawers on the front of it and stood just a bit taller. It lacked, however, in length. As I diligently brushed off the pounds of dust from it, I discovered the top had been carved. The last name Campbell appeared when all the dust was cleared. It was sketched in, with obvious frustration. I should have just ignored it, maybe left it for the next family find it, but curiosity got the best of me. I didn't know anyone of the last name Campbell, nor had I ever seen this type of dresser before. I jiggled open the first drawer to find some answers. In the first drawer laid a bunch of pictures. They were pretty old, probably at least 50 or 60 years. Some were of a darling, young couple. Others had the couple and 3 young children. A few in the mix showed scenes of people sitting around a table as if in discussion. Candles were lit, and even though it was black and white, the radiance shined in the photos. I turned over the photos as I went. I found the young couple pictured shared the last name etched into the dresser. I identified them as Maura and Arnold Campbell. The picture of them with children were labeled as their 2 daughters and 1 son, Madeline, L, and Charles Campbell. The photos of what appeared to be group meetings was just labeled as Congregation of Campbell, Session 2. I didn't quite understand what that meant. I placed the photos next to me on the floor and went to open the second drawer. This drawer didn't contain much besides a couple of white candles, much like the ones in the pictures. Drawer number 3 held what looked like random rods bent on one end, a pendulum, tape recorder, and a radio. To my disappointment, the tape recorder was empty. The fourth drawer held some unnerving dolls that I decided should just be dumped. The last drawer was the oddest, amazingly. Within drawer number 5 were a few journals. The pages were yellow and had some damage, but I still managed to skim through them. What looked like were poems laid on each page. Some were followed by observations and reflection. Doodles covered one of the journals, inside and out. There were many religious symbols along with sketches of people being guided by scribbles. The whole thing felt very off-putting, almost like I was looking into someone's personal life. I decided to shove the photographs into one of the journals and do some research later. I left the house without showing my father anything, in fear he would just tell me to toss it all. I pulled up a search engine on my computer the second I walked into my apartment. I spread out the journals and photographs around me on my living room floor. I figured my first clue was Campbell. However, upon searching just the last name, I was flooded with pretty much nothing. It was too common of a last name. My next bet was to go straight for Congregation of Campbell. I don't think I was really ready for what I was about to find. As the results loaded, a link to an informative page popped up. It was one of those encyclopedia type of websites. I figured it was a pretty big thing if these words were found in its database. From the first paragraph, I knew what I had found was something of a terrifying origin. The biographical page described the Congregation of Campbell to be a religious organization that was founded in the late 1960s. It was founded by Arnold Campbell. He later pulled his wife into the organization, against her will. Her name was Maura Campbell. I had to stop for a second. I minimized the page and stared over the photo I held of Arnold and Maura. He had his arm around her and neither one of them had a smile painted on their faces. I turned the photo over and continued reading. The page described the religion as more of a cult that worshipped a spirit they had been known to contact. The spirit went by Ma. Just simply Ma. How the spirit was originally contacted is not clear, but it was contacted by Arnold. Upon talking to the spirit, Arnold filled journals full of words and spells that Ma gave to him. I shuddered, looking over at the journal I thought had poems. They were spells. I read on. The congregation didn't form until almost 2 years after Arnold originally contacted Ma. He had told some buddies about the situation and they wanted to check it out for themselves. They were apparently told great things by Ma. The Spirit shared wisdom and light, promises of great futures for all, and with that the friends were hooked. They called each meeting a session. By the 4th meeting, the group had grown to over 30 members. All lonely, depressed souls finding some hope in the words of Ma. Arnold fell in love with the congregation but his wife didn't. According to some original members, Maura felt her husband was going insane. She never saw or heard anything from Ma and was worried being surrounded by all of this would make her children go insane. Eventually she came around to it to please Arnold. Maura got lost in it just as quickly as Arnold had. She went to Ma for all advice. From raising her children to what to make for dinner, Ma had a hold on everyone in the house except for one daughter. The outcast daughter, Elle, didn't like Ma nor did she like the congregation. She was the youngest of the bunch and didn't quite understand it. She was still forced to attend sessions, which were soon held in community centers in which they would pray and worship Ma, but never quite got it. It scared her, some former members recall. Everything took a very dark turn as the years went on. The congregation grew larger and with the buzz of Ma, the Spirit got more powerful, a former member claimed. The more intense meetings got, the more Elle spoke out. She went as far as to interrupt a whole service to call her father a fraud and curse the family name. After this, Elle went missing. Just completely vanished. When asked if they had any involvement in the disappearing of Elle, every single member declined even have ever heard of Elle. However, this event left a crack in the group. The last 2 children of Maura and Arnold ran away from home, completely disassociating themselves from their parents and the congregation. There's never been any word of what happened to them. Maura and Arnold committed suicide shortly after their remaining children disowned them. The webpage claimed the organization is still followed today but like to keep themselves under the radar. Any evidence of Ma has never been discovered. My eyes were watering at the end of my reading. I stared at the photos harder, wondering what horrifying things these people did, and still do, all because of a spirit. I decided it was time to ask my father about this. The dresser was located in his attic, after all. I dialed his number, still staring at the informative page. "Hey, kiddo," he cheerily asked. "Hey, Dad," I took a breath. "I got some questions for you." "Okay," he chuckled, uneasy. "Fire away. Do you know about the dresser in your attic?" There was a little pause. "The small one? In the back?" "Yeah," I confirmed. Yeah, your mother and I bought it at a garage sale when we first bought the house. Your mother wanted to refurbish it but it always just sat in the attic. I don't know much about it, but she used to spend a lot of time up there with it." My father sounded so calm and I was getting more worked up. "Did you ever go into it?" I pressed no, I never thought about it. "Why?" He was sounding annoyed and I didn't blame him. I took another breath, still staring at the web page. What was Mom's maiden name? "Holly, what's going on? What was Mom's maiden name, please?" I asked again. "She never told us." My father let out a long sigh. "De Camnethly or something like that. Seemed Italian to me." Campbell, I gotta go, Dad." I hung up as he was yelling his protests. I fumbled with a pen and paper from my coffee table, carefully spelling out the name Madeline Campbell. When rearranged, it unmistakably spelled out Mabel de Camnethly, my mother's supposed name. I stare back at the photos of the children and their parents, the first time I found anything about my mother's family. Now I knew why she ran, why she changed everything about her, why there was never any Christmases or presents from her family. I wondered why she had to hide when her parents were dead, but then my eyes skimmed back over the fact this was still active. The organization still ran and still had members out there. Arnold and Maura were still praised for their creation, but on such a secretive level I didn't know how far it reached. Quietly, I shut my laptop, gathered the journals and pictures, and went to my backyard. With a little lighter fluid and matches, my mother's burden and shame went up in smoke. Story 9, When I Met Car. I come from a long family line of truckers. Grandpa was a trucker on both sides. Both parents are truckers who run their own business with their own trucks. My parents usually took care of me taking turns. When one is out, the other stays in. Sometimes, when it's a big job and they both had to go, they would drop me off with my grandma and Aunt Becky, who stayed at a farm in Arizona. Now I use the term farm loosely. It was basically a house and a barn surrounded by nothing on all four sides, as these farms in Arizona turn out to be, and they raised some mean old chickens. I would have loved to have gone on the trips with my ma and dad, but I guess I understood why they wouldn't want to take a whiny 8-year-old along when they knew they would be out of sleep for days. As I got older, I would accompany them on their trips, helping out with the truck, but this is not a tale of such a journey. There are plenty, maybe another day. No, this is a story about what happened when I stayed at Aunt Becky's farm. Aunt Becky had only one child of her own at the time I stayed over, and little Rayleigh was 6. I was the big boy and we would be outside, adventuring through make-believe worlds. She adored me as I toted on her as a brother should. She stood by my side through the strange voyages my young mind would take her on, and in turn, I made sure she was thoroughly entertained. It was on one such adventure, the sweat covering my face, as I ran around trying to rescue her from the meanest chicken of all. I let out a cry, as I had often done before, in other worlds. Rayleigh's eyes found mine, her freckle-covered face flushed pink with brown ringlets of her messy hair lining her face. She had strayed further away this time than she had before. Maybe our adventures emboldened her too. Maybe she saw me straying by myself earlier. She was running towards the only elm tree which stood for miles, a good while away from the house. I ran after her, the heat draining the life out of me with every step and the sun's golden rays boring into the pores of my skin. It is funny how there are certain moments when the world slows down and you notice every little momentary change around you. A cool gust of wind swept through my feet, in stark contrast to the heat radiating from the top half of my body. The musty odor of the first raindrop on dry sand wafted into my nostrils as I stopped to look at the sky. There were no clouds. I looked back to the single tree where which Rayleigh had been running to. There was no Rayleigh. I ran back to the house to get Aunt Becky. Somehow, no fear of punishment was greater than the fear of having lost my cousin quite literally in front of my eyes. Aunt Becky knew from my face that this was no game, and she called the police right away, and we went out looking while Grandma stayed back in case Rayleigh returned. It was nearing sunset when we were still roaming near the single tree, our throats hoarse from screaming out for Rayleigh. The golden rays of the sun were no longer harsh, and an uneasy but familiar cold gust caressed my legs. I ran to the tree, each of my step landing harder than the last, my voice broken from the grief. As I ran around the tree, I ran into a seated figure. Her hair was snow, peppered with the sands of the desert and the clouds that the storms bring, her face strewn with warts and boils as many as were the lines on her face, and her eyes, one eye was the night sky on a moonless night and the other, the moon covering up the entire sky. Time stopped still as I stood looking into her veiled eyes, not noticing the soft pink fabric of Rayleigh's frock huddled in her arms. As soon as she had appeared, she disappeared, and all in a moment in my young mind's eye, there was a giant crow perched atop the tree, the now whimpering Rayleigh at my feet. Relief swept over my little body and my legs could carry me no more, as I plopped right next to Rayleigh holding her, unexpected tears covering my face. My aunt found us not long after. Rayleigh was taken to the hospital and I was taken home. I waited home for Rayleigh, but being the 8-year-old I found myself wandering to the elm tree which stood alone. There, sat by the elm, was the witch who had taken Rayleigh and the fairy who had brought her back to me. I found my legs moved on my own as they carried me over to her. No fear overtook me, no anger either. I sat by her side, in the type of peace unknown to an 8-year-old. She patted my head and dropped a necklace around my neck. She said she would come get me if I felt harm, as she had for my sister, but she spoke no words. Her voice resounded inside of head, cackling like damp logs lit on fire. It must have took hours before I asked what happened to my sister. She replied that there were things in the land that have been around for longer than our people. She said I would understand when I see them myself. I nodded, as if I understood. That moment of clarity was long gone, but what she had said that day resounded in my head multiple times, burned into my mind as I traveled with my parents for the years to follow. I don't remember how I would up back at home or on the bed or when I fell asleep. I only remember being woken up by Rayleigh, who was now back home. After giving her a giant big brother hug, she tugged on the necklace which the old lady had given me. "You met her too?" she said as she pulled out her own amulet. "But it's a secret, right?" I nodded. It was our secret. An impossible hunger carried me downstairs where I was met with my parents, our family all together, ecstatic that our ordeal was over, while Rayleigh and I shared a glance and a knowing smile. It would be many years before I would be able to meet her again. What happened that summer has changed the young me, making me believe in things of this world we don't understand much of, and has perhaps saved me in more ways than one. To me, she is Car. Young me was very creative with names. Maybe she is a fairy of sorts, maybe she is a witch. Maybe I should tell you my other encounters and let you decide. Story 10, I regret leaving my wardrobe unlocked. I have never been in the No Sleep subreddit before, never got an account even on Reddit, but after what happened, I had to make a post and talk about it. So a bit info first. I am a 16-year-old girl, live in Germany with my mom and two brothers. I moved to Germany about 3 years ago, and a part of my new furniture was a black wardrobe, with a mirror on one of the doors. It isn't too big, and it had a lock with a key to lock it, which I found strange, but I figured it's to keep stuff safe from burglars. At first I was in a small room, not too much space. Only my desk, my bed and my wardrobe. At night I'd sit on my bed and if I glanced up, I'd see my reflection and I'd spook myself. Silly, I know. I never really used the lock for a long time. After a while though, I kept noticing that my wardrobe door would be open, even though I remember closing it. I asked my mom and my brothers, but they all said they didn't touch my stuff or got into my room for that matter. They said I must have opened it and forgotten. So I started locking it. Some time after, I changed rooms with my mom, and I got the big bedroom. I had my bed replaced, new shelves, another table, a couch, and my old desk and wardrobe. I didn't really think much of it, but in the far back of my head I had this hope I could get rid of it. It became a habit to lock it. At night, before I go to bed, I lock my wardrobe and go to sleep. Whenever I forgot to do that, I'd freak out, get out of bed, no matter how tired I was, and lock it. That's what I've been doing this whole time. Until last night. I went to lock my wardrobe as usual and thought, this is silly. Why do I even lock it? And just closed the doors without touching the key. I got into bed and started dozing off. It takes me some time to fall asleep, so I was still getting in and out of dreamland. I heard something though, that woke me up completely and with my heart racing. It sounded like a thud. I thought that I heard it in my dream and maybe I was just freaking myself out, so I held my breath, sat still and listened. Nothing. How silly of me. I turned around in my bed and got comfortable. My face was turned, staring at the wardrobe. I saw it being slightly adjust, but so little that I didn't really notice it at first. But eventually, I sank in cold sweat and my heart started racing with every passing second. Ever so slightly, so slowly it was almost not noticeable, the door to my wardrobe creaked open. It was slow and steady. So slow though, I thought I was hallucinating. Once the door was completely ajar, and I had no doubts something was horribly wrong, I heard the thud again and immediately after, one of my shoes jumped out of the closet. I sound like a maniac saying this, but it literally jumped out, like it had its own foot in it. I freaked out. I jumped out of bed and ran to my mother. Thankfully she was still awake. I told her what happened, but she didn't believe me. I practically dragged her to my room, and showed her the shoe and the open wardrobe. She looked at me kinda silly, took the shoe, threw it back in and closed the door. She said if it makes me feel better, we can change the wardrobe in a month or so. She went away, back to her room, and to sleep. I was at a loss. I double-locked the wardrobe doors and put my chair in front of it just in case. I was so freaked out I couldn't sleep. I regret leaving my wardrobe door unlocked. I could have been sleeping in peace. But now my mom thinks I'm delusional and I can't feel safe in my room anymore. Story 11, my girlfriend's been acting odd. Let me backtrack a little bit. I've been with my girlfriend, Vanessa, for a few months now and things have been great. We met through work and we immediately hit it off. We are basically on the same wavelength with almost everything, if that makes any sense. Our relationship just feels to be so natural, right, and great. Definitely a lot of the latter. However, more recently, things have been getting a little weird. We tend to alternate between weekends on who stays at whose place. More recently she's been staying at my place, but there are few occurrences where I'll stay at her place, and when I do, I don't know. Weird things tend to happen, consistently. For example, I seem to acquire some kind of sickness every time I spend more than a night at her house. These illnesses involve symptoms of coughing, sore throat, congestion, stomach pains, and even vomiting. They vary each instance, but a sickness surely follows every night I spend at her house. I'm spending the night at her house tonight and I'll let you know how that goes, but I do want to inform that I noticed something strange last weekend, when I spent the weekend at her house. We had decided that I would spend the weekend at her place, to which I drove to her place on Friday feeling completely fine. Healthy as can be. That Friday night, though, I started to feel some symptoms of sickness. Sore throat, congestion and even fever-esque itchiness. I made Vanessa aware of this and she felt it to be as odd as I did. 2 a.m. came around and I hadn't fallen to sleep. I'm typically not one to complain, as I feel that when I do I inconvenience others. Regardless, Vanessa happened to notice my discomfort and, being the phenomenal person she is, went ahead and told me she would fetch some medicine for me. After accepting her aid, I noticed something strange. After accepting her aid, Vanessa left the room and I proceeded to lay down on my back, as that position aided my congestion. However, I noticed a noise that occurred outside of Vanessa's house, in the backyard. Her bedroom has a window facing the backyard, so, curiously, I leaned forward and peeked out the window to see what was happening. Oddly enough, I saw Vanessa just standing there, in her garden. She wasn't moving, at all. I mean, I waited, watching her for a full minute, 60 seconds, and she didn't move. She just stood there. Finally, she dropped to her knees and started digging, viciously, into the dirt of this garden. I didn't know what to think. But I swear I saw her pick something up after she had dug into the ground. I saw her walk back into the house and, shortly after, enter the bedroom and hand me these pills. I took them without question. But I can't help but wonder. They did not appear to be pills I'm familiar with. Did she get these from the ground she dug up, or did she acquire them from an innocent bottle in her medicine cupboard? I don't know. What is happening? I'll let you know how tonight goes in the following days. Story 12, The Pieces We Leave. If it weren't for our cat, I don't know where I'd be today. Or maybe what or if I would be is more accurate. The room was familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. I knew I was in a friend's house, on his old early 2000s sofa. There were people and kids and streamers and empty cake plates on the coffee table. It was somebody's kid's 3rd birthday, but wasn't that kid in high school? There was a hand on my knee. It felt warm. It was attached to a bare, well-tanned arm. I turned and saw that the arm belonged to a pretty brunette, my buddy Ryan's girlfriend from how long ago? What was her name? Melissa? I asked. Her eyes sparkled. Hey, Ben, she said with happy grin, I'm so glad you're here. Melissa leaned closer, and I saw that her little green sundress was even littler than I remembered. Her long hair brushed my elbow. I smelled jasmine and citrus. I don't think the others can see us, she said in a lower tone. I glanced around, nobody was looking at me, and I couldn't really focus on the others, either. Melissa's face was inches from mine, one glossy lip curled between her white teeth. She pulled it free with a soft bip sound. This was making me really uncomfortable, in more than one way. "Hey," I stuttered, "I don't know if—" Melissa leaned hard on my chest. Her tongue rasped across my chin and her whiskers tickled my nose. I reflexively jerked my head to one side and struggled to sit up. The room was dark, I was in bed, and our long-haired Calico was crouching on my chest, purring softly. Thanks?" I mumbled, confused. I reached up to scratch Georgina's ears, but she jumped down. "What a weird, awkward dream," I thought as I moved closer to my wife and drifted back to sleep. "Did we leave the bedroom door open last night?" Maggie asked me in the morning. "I thought you hated it when Georgie jumped on the bed." I shrugged. "It's not such a bad thing, really." Her question reminded me of the dream. How long ago had that party been? What had made me dream about it? How many girlfriends had Ryan gone through since then? I bet even he didn't think about Melissa anymore. I went about my day and mostly forgot about the dream. At bedtime, though, I left the door cracked open. The sofa was surprisingly soft. Its upholstery was a golden yellow cotton, except for the blue smear of cake frosting beside my right knee. Did I do that? I had a guilty feeling about it. Could I wipe it up with Sprite before anyone noticed? No, don't brush at it, that'll make it worse, just dab it gently. In my embarrassment, I hadn't even noticed Melissa sitting on my left. "Here, let me show you." She leaned across me, put her smooth hand on mine, and pressed my Sprite-soaked paper napkin against the stain while her body pressed against me. Melissa looked up as she guided my hand. "Just press, release, and repeat till it's finished," she smiled, tilting her face closer. "Like this." Her eyelids lowered and her lips parted. I wanted to turn aside. Really, I did. "Meow, oh, Lord. That was Maggie. I think she's hungry," I said, pushing Georgie off of me and stumbling toward the kitchen. I'm not sure I was talking about the cat. The dreams troubled me that day. Anyone can have a crazy dream, but two dreams of that intensity on successive nights? Dreams about a day and a person from almost 15 years ago? I barely remembered Melissa, and I didn't think I'd even had a whole conversation with her when she was dating Ryan. I hadn't seen Ryan himself in a couple of years. Here and there throughout the day, I tried looking up dream interpretations, supernatural dreams, how to control dreams, whatever I could think of. I didn't find anything that seemed really applicable to my case. I went to bed that night with nothing new except a determination to be mindful if I dreamed and a hope that I wouldn't dream at all. "And I left the door left open, Ben," Melissa said. Her fingers were twined in my hair. The room all around was dim, everything beyond the sofa and the coffee table looked somehow flat, indistinct, out of focus. Her voice came closer. "I need Fruit Busters," I exclaimed. I leaned forward and grabbed a packet of kids' fruit snacks from the table. "Do you like these?" I'd read that spirits can sometimes be appeased with sugar and alcohol. I didn't know whether this was some kind of spirit dream, but I was desperate. I held up a blue candy. "I think the blue ones are my favorites," I lied. I never did like fruit snacks, especially this brand. Without a word, Melissa snatched it from me and popped it in her mouth. I took the opportunity to disentangle myself and scoot a few inches away from her. "A red one," I said. I was never sure, are they cherry or strawberry? Melissa's other hand released my hair to take it and press it between her lips. I tried to smile genuinely as I rushed to pull out another fruit buster. This one was orange. "Melissa, do you remember where we are? Weren't there lots of other people around?" Melissa laughed as she bit into the orange candy and the gel center ran down her chin. She wiped it up and sucked the sticky fluid off of her finger. "It was some kid's birthday, wasn't it?" she asked. "Maybe they went back for more cake. This sofa would make a nice bouncy castle," she said as she scooted closer. "Yikes. Here, try a green one, I think it's sour apple." My mind was racing, but I felt like it was in neutral. The little packet was already half empty. "What are we even doing here, Melissa?" Why does everything look distorted? Melissa shivered as she crushed the green candy between her molars. Sour. She giggled. Don't you remember the pictures everyone took? There was one where you just dropped your frosting and I was sitting next to you, laughing? And my legs were crossed like this and I was wearing these big, old 6-inch cork sandals? She kicked a sandal off as she uncrossed her legs. It sailed over the table and I never heard it land. The move brought her closer. How about lemon? I said, trying to move back. This exchange may sound amusing, but if I could sweat in dreams, I would have been drenched. I don't know if it was instinct or if it was because of what I'd read during the day, but I had a sense of dread, like there was a vast, empty gulf lurking just beneath the surface of Melissa's breezy, aggressive flirting. That if I let her connect with me in certain ways, the consequences would be beyond anything I could imagine. I hate lemon, Melissa said with a grin. She squeezed the candy in her fingers until it popped, then put it in her mouth. Oops, I think I got some on your ear. Here, let me. No, I got it. I leaned back further and dug out the final fruit snack. Listen, Melissa, what was special about that photo? I really don't remember. It was just an average day at an average, little kid's birthday party, wasn't it? Melissa threw her head back and laughed deeply. The top button of her dress was undone. It was a boring day, and Ryan turned out to be a boring guy. Melissa plucked the grapefruit buster out of my hand. She held it up between us, rolling it gently between her thumb and fingers. You were actually my favorite in those days, Ben, kind of low-key, good-looking and funny. But you were always with that girl, Maggie. And then we all drifted apart. Melissa sucked the purple fruit snack into her mouth with a sound just like when she chewed her lip. As she talked, she pressed the candy against the roof of her mouth with her tongue until it burst. I must have had 10 phones since that one, she said, but somehow that old photo always transferred. Anyway, she paused to swallow the spent shell. It's just a dream, Ben. Melissa's hard, glossy fingernails scraped my palm as she pushed the empty snack packet out of my grasp. Her bare foot slid down into the side of my loafer, and she rose up one knee to tower over me. It's just a dream for you, she repeated. I smelled her scent and felt her wavy hair brush my cheek. For me, I need a man in my life. Her free hand hitched at the hem of her sundress. I need a man in my... She shoved me. Not Melissa. An awful racket was going on close by. Ben, wake up, Maggie said. Georgie's having a fit or something in the hallway. Did you or the kids feed her tonight? I looked, the door was closed, and the cat was yowling and scratching at the other side. Sounds like a screen door, I said groggily. All the way to the kitchen, Georgie stayed close around my ankles. Her food bowl was full, so I got out a bag of treats. Good girl, I mumbled to her, over and over. I must have given her 10 or 11 treats. In between each one, she bent to sniff one particular spot on my foot. There was no way I was getting back to sleep. I fired up my laptop and made coffee. An hour and a half later, I emailed my boss to say I needed a day off. I had other business to attend to. Once I finally remembered Melissa's last name, the rest came pretty quickly. The first thing I learned was that Melissa was dead. 3 days ago, she had fallen from a high balcony at her office building. They didn't know yet if anyone else was involved. Her social media was pretty wide open. She didn't have kids or, apparently, a current so. Lots of pictures of herself at bars and wineries and her office, living what I'd consider a typical, directionless kind of lifestyle. I thought a long time about what to do. I couldn't go without sleep forever. The only concrete thing Melissa had mentioned was an old photo on her phone. If I could find and destroy the photo, I thought, maybe that would stop the dreams. It seemed silly, but it was all I had to go on. I kept researching until the time I'd normally get ready to go to work. The Washington, D.C. metro area is big, and I must have driven it all twice that day. I decided to pose as Melissa's grieving brother and check out every place she might have frequented. I didn't know if she had a brother, but I gambled that most of the people I'd meet wouldn't know either. Her apartment staff actually let me in to look around, but I didn't find a phone there. Her fitness club had a few phones in Lost and Found, but a quick tap on each one showed me none were hers. I got to her office at what must have been lunchtime. Almost nobody was there except a young 20s guy at the front desk who looked at me sadly, told me to go on in and went back to his work. Melissa's office was messy, but tiny. The only power strip was maxed out with a desk phone and computer components. Her purse was still there, but no phone. I started praying that she hadn't been carrying her phone when she fell, that it wasn't sealed away in a police evidence locker. In the hallway leading to the restrooms, I passed a little nook with chairs and a side table. A thin, black cable stretched from beneath a trade magazine toward the wall. The magazine concealed a thin, black Samsung. Its lock screen was a selfie of Melissa. Of course, it was password protected, but I didn't care. I slipped the device into my pocket and went back to my car. I didn't know if smashing the phone or submerging it would actually destroy the photo. Or, if I somehow hacked in and deleted it, would that be enough? Best to be on the safe side. I bought some firewood on the way home. Only Georgina was there to greet me when I got back. It was a cool, breezy afternoon, perfect for sitting by the fire pit. From her perch at the family room window, Georgie watched me build the biggest fire our pit could handle and light it up. I sipped the Cuba Libre I'd made for myself and waited for the flames to build. Feeling relaxed, I slipped Melissa's phone out of my pocket. Just as I held it up, it started to flash and vibrate. The motion scared me half to death, and I pitched the phone straight into the fire without looking. I wondered later where that call might have come from, but I decided it was better not to know. I'd learned something about myself, and that was enough for me. I slept a deep, dreamless sleep that night. The next day, I scraped and sifted all of the ashes from our pit. The few melted bits of metal I found went back into the heap, and I dumped it all into a neighbor's trash bin after dark. Later, a thought occurred to me: how many other photos did she keep on that thing? It had been ages since I'd talked with Ryan. I gave him a call to reassure myself he was okay. He picked up right away. "Hey, buddy, what's new?" We talked about work and sports and old friends for a while. I didn't bring up Melissa. It was a nice conversation, like old times. "We should really keep in better touch," I said. "Absolutely," Ryan replied, and then he was quiet for a second. I heard a small sound, like he was chewing his lip in thought. "Hey, remember that cliff face in Shenandoah Park we always said we'd free climb one day? How about we actually go do that sometime? Bet we'd get some great photos." Story 13, to my son. "You see, Brandon, I didn't leave you and your mother because I was unhappy with the two of you. Not at all. I can't even lay my gaze down upon another girl without hurting for your mama. Though you may not recall me or care, 14 years have gone by and every day I wonder what kind of man you are. I write to you not hoping for a reply, but with hope you will forgive the memory of me. When I left you, it had not been my intention to leave the house at all that day. I knew it would continue raining, so I planned to fix the leak in the cellar rather than go to work. It was coming from a crack in the foundation. Each time it rained, and sometimes when it didn't, black, sludgy water came oozing and trickling its way towards the drain in the center of the floor. That morning I set my coffee on the ground next to a bucket of mixed concrete. At that moment, nothing was leaking out of the crack. It was about a foot long from the floor up, stained black. I gave the concrete mix a few stirs, and peered into the crack, hoping I could determine how deep it went, but it was too dark. Behind me, the drain coughed and spluttered. I pulled on a pair of work gloves and my fingers just fit where the gap was widest, and tried to find the earth. When I was about wrist deep, the cellar light buzzed excitedly and blew, leaving me on my knees in the dark. I quickly tried to withdraw my hand from the gap, but found I could not. The drain was gurgling noisily. The concrete seemed tight on my wrist and I pulled frantically, twisting my hand as I did so. I could not fit my hand back through the gap and the darkness of the cellar was pressing down on the rest of me. I tried not to think about how it would feel if the mysterious black goo would come slowly leaking out over my hand and down my arm. Keeping calm might save you from a situation such as this, but I was very much over the edge right then. I cried for help weakly, knowing you were at school and your lovely mother at work. It seemed to me something called back my cry in a taunting voice from the drain, and my spine went rigid, my heart felt a nauseating tension and I held my breath. Okay. That was probably just an echo or the spluttering of fluid deep in the bowels of the cellar I was hearing. I tried to think of something funny I could say to you whenever you arrived home to find me in the dark on my knees, hand jammed in this monster crevice. I smiled wryly in the dark, thinking something along the lines of, it turns out your mother has a lot in common with this house. I felt something brush the outside of my work glove and my insides iced over. There are a lot of horrible ways to feel fear, and this cellar was a capsule compressed, extra strength, fast dissolving and multiple symptoms. And I had to use the washroom. I thought I might just aim it at the drain in spite. And then I wondered, to spite what? The drain laughed at me. My coffee was probably just outside my reach. My fingers now felt suspended in a thick substance. The cement mix was probably rock hard in the bucket. I had picked up the stuff with quick drying action, hoping the black water wouldn't ruin my handiwork before it had set. A cool slime wrapped itself around my wrist, and I felt a suction. My arm slid deeper into the crack and I screamed in pain and horror. A blast of cold air from the crevice hit my face and made me shudder, and I felt the stuff getting in my work glove, felt it running down my arm, looking for the drain that was still gurgling hungrily behind me. The pressure on my arm grew horribly tighter as it slid even deeper in, crushing me. In my mind I saw myself pulled inside the crack, squeezed by the cellar walls until my body was nothing but black sludge, where it would release me to the drain. Trapped like an animal, I began struggling and whimpering, sweating while goosebumps creeped up my arm from the mysterious draft that came with the sludge now beginning to feel its way out of the crack and around my body. My vision was flashing white, it seemed, and I thought I could see a pair of black pupils in vast eyes, only inches from my face. It came in and out of focus, and when I closed my eyes it was still there, in the darkness behind my shut lids. It felt as though someone was holding my hand in the cellar wall. Someone or something had been put behind that wall, I thought frantically, and it was me. I gingerly felt with my free hand the edges of the crack, terribly frightened, so I trembled badly that this hand too would be sucked into the crevice. To my horror it seemed to me the crack now came nearly 3 feet off the ground and seemed to also widen in parts. The drain was now making gulping sounds, and an odor rose from it that made me gag. I tried to breath, but instead I panted. The sludge water stung where it hit the many scratches and few gouges up my arm from my struggle. I pushed against the wall with my free hand and heaved, willing to rip out my trapped arm and leave it there if only I could get out of this cellar and above the earth. The crack was spreading, not falling apart and crumbling, but like the darkness within was eating it away, and I could see those pupils again. Wild with an ecstasy in my fear, it wanted to pull me into the crack, and I felt the suction, the coldness, pulling me towards what was now a gaping hole where someone held my hand in the dark. I felt the water climbing my ankles, and realized the water must be rising up the drain as well. And for a slight moment, under the mind-numbing horror, felt grateful that I had not urinated into it. I screamed for you and I screamed for me, and I wrenched with everything I had, felt my shoulder pulling from the socket, and I fell back, arm attached and free, but hand still grasping your mother's, all I could see in the darkness. She was wet and filthy from the black water, and she was rotted. She was naked except for a moldy bra, and her stomach was sagged and bloated. The greenish-yellow skin stretched taut, looking in danger of bursting and releasing her insides on me, and her right collarbone jutted out dangerously while the left wasn't visible at all, and her jaw was slackened skin grey and held with a liquid strength. Her eyes were gone, sockets wide and gaping, but black crazed pupils gazed at me from the depths, and she pulled me into an embrace, and I think she pulled me into the hole after all. Because all I remember after that is I never stopped screaming like help would come if I tore my throat out with noise and a sensation like being swallowed by the darkness, or perhaps gulped up by the drain. I don't know. Your mother got me. Ha ha. I think she told me I put her in the wall. I told her I don't remember. Stay out of the cellar, Brandon. Don't find yourself beneath the earth before you die. You found me that day, laying at the foot of the stairs. The light was still on. The bucket is knocked over, but the concrete in the bottom was already hard. The crack is still there, a foot high off the floor. Just a crack. You thought I must have fallen down the stairs. You called an ambulance for me, and later, when you came with your mother and visited me at the hospital, I saw that her face was rotting off. They sedated me, you went home, went back to school, and I moved to a permanent mental care residence. It's been 14 years since I was pulled into that void, and I forgive you for not wanting to pop in there for a visit. Sometimes your mother comes and I gaze at her sadly while the hair stands on the back of my neck, trying to remember that lovely face I missed so much. Your mama's smile was worth $1 billion, son. But those black pupils deep in that withered skeleton, that uncanny grin, the darkness enveloping me again, and I scream every time. She moans behind that grin. They sedate me. I'm afraid I'll wake up behind that wall where I must have left her. Just stay out of the cellar, Brandon. Love, your dad. Story 14, Symbiosis. When people asked me why I worked for the suicide hotline, I gave them canned answers. I just want to help people, or, it looks great on my resume. In truth, I didn't know why. When I started, I was fresh out of college, directionless, depressed, and too proud to admit it. Subconsciously, I must have thought working the hotline would make me better. I thought if I could take in enough of other people's pain, it would smother my own. Then I would be good. Then I could get out clean, and start my life somewhere new. I got what I was looking for on my final overnight shift. I bargained for salvation, and caught a lethal dose. It was just after 2 a.m. on a Sunday night. The other counselors had left at midnight. I was alone. The office was small, a local affiliate of the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Opened as a flophouse in the 60s, kept open by a few charitable donors. A lobby and a phone room. Ratty sofa. 2000s era hardware. Buzzing fluorescent lights, the last on in the office building each night. Outside, it had just started raining, that hot kind of Midwestern summer rain that feels like it had washed off a warm body, hanging somewhere just above you in the dark. I had been on the phone with a teenager from rural Missouri. They were lonely, like most of the callers, and worried about the future, like most everyone. I calmed her down, convinced her to talk to her school counselor the next day. It was often the most you could do for kid callers, the kids whose parents didn't understand mental health, didn't know how deep that well goes. We wrapped up the call, and I sat in silence for a few minutes, still carrying the kid's weight. Then I put it down, and got another cup of coffee. I drank it by the window, trying to watch the rain gather outside, but the lights were too bright, and all I could see was the reflection, dark and distorted by the tempered glass. I always wondered if that glass was bulletproof. The phones rang. Local number. I pulled up the call logs, a handful of previous calls, mostly brief, all within the last few months. Hello, I said, Free State Counseling Center. There was static on the other end. Ragged breath. Uncertainty caught in their throat. Hi, he said. How are you doing tonight? I asked. More silence. I could hear rain falling on his end, intermingled with the static and the rain outside. I let him gather his thoughts while I read through the summaries of his previous calls. Highly disjointed. Marked as possibly experiencing alternative realities. I am cold, he said. Are you outside? I asked. Sounds like it's raining, where you are. Silence. One log entry included vague statements about being hunted. Another uses the word, infected. Previous counselors were unable to get anything coherent out of him. Possibly suffering from an untreated psychiatric disorder. Maybe just drugs. Something brings me way out here, he said. What time is it? 2:45, I said. Sounds like you're feeling really out of control, right now, I said, trying to skirt around the delusions. 3 a.m., Thursday? He asked. Sunday night, I said. Monday morning. Long sigh on his end. Rattling cough. Weekend sure goes fast, doesn't it? I said. You could say that. We sat together for a minute, listening to the rain pick up. I read through his last entry. Longer, more coherent. Or maybe the counselor was just better at getting through. It detailed an elaborate delusion about being controlled by something intermittently. Nothing unusual for our callers, but I always struggled with these types of calls. What's got you calling tonight? I asked. What's your name? He asked. Henry. Henry, he said. That's a nice name. A blast of static erupted from my earpiece, jolting me awake. It died back down, leaving my ear ringing. Could you hear that? He asked. I'm sorry, Henry. That happens, sometimes. That's okay, I said. What's your name? Silence. I read on in the log entry. The caller had mentioned blackouts, some lasting several hours. He would find himself coming to in the middle of the night, usually in a park, or the edge of town. Often on hills, or anywhere high above the ground. Are you feeling safe, right now? I asked. I want to make sure you're in a safe place to talk. I haven't felt safe for a while, Henry, he said. Are you thinking of hurting yourself tonight? I asked, my alertness rising. I scanned his previous entries for any addresses. He laughed, clearing his throat. No, he said. Nothing like that. I didn't mean to scare you. You said you didn't feel safe. I asked, still searching the logs for any identifying information. I had hoped I wouldn't have to call police dispatch that night. Another blast of static. The lights flickered. There's something inside me, Henry, he said. I think it wants me to be found. It sounds like you're feeling really overwhelmed, I said. I can hear that. Hey, Henry, can you not do that? He said. The reflective listening thing. My wife is a social worker, I get enough of that at home. Sure thing, I said, reaching for a pen. Sorry about that. He sighed, again. It's all right. I'm having a shitty night. It sounds like a rough one, I said. Do you think it might help to talk to your wife about it? Another long silence. I returned to the call log overview. I saw something strange. 3 unread entries, all from this number, had appeared since we had been talking. All time stamped for my shift. There was no one else here. I clicked to open one, but my computer froze. I tapped the keyboard, impatient. Blue screen. The last thing I said to my wife was, "We'll tell the kids tomorrow," he said. That's the last thing I remember, anyway. How old are your kids? I asked, moving to the other computer station. I hit the power button. Nothing. I reached behind the chewed-up desk, searching for the power cable. I don't have a lot of time, Henry, he said. Are you alone? It's me and 2 other counselors, plus security, I said, hoping to be convincing. I unplugged the power cable. Plugged it back in. Still dead. That's good, he said. I don't want to distract you from other callers. That's very considerate of you, I said, opening the breaker box. That's me, he said. Ever considerate. Listen, I said, I think the storm is causing issues with the power. I'm going to switch you to a hard wire. If I lose you, I'll call you right back. Is that okay? That's okay, Henry, he said. I could tell he was smiling, but he sounded sad. You fiddle with the power, and I'll call you back in a little while. He hung up. I found an ancient hardwire phone in a dusty storage closet, plugged it in. I flipped the breakers off, throwing the office into darkness. I flipped them back on. Nothing. Darkness, still. Gradually, the lights began to glow back to life, eerie and incandescent, flashing intermittently. The computers remained dead, and the speakers hissed with static, crackling in an interference pattern. I sat for a while, in the half-light, fighting with my nerves. The rain had stopped at some point, leaving wet silence in its wake. My relief was due at 8 a.m. My phone read 3:30. I paced around the office, trying to shake the anxiety out of my hands. I drank tea. It didn't help. I usually hoped for a slow night, on the overnight shifts, but at that moment, I begged for someone to call, anyone to dispel the otherworldly air that had seeped into the office, worked its way into my skin. The phone rang at 4. I was sweating, by then, and my hands fumbled with the receiver. Free State Counseling Center, I said, clearing my throat. Come to the door, Henry, he said. The phone squealed in my ear. I dropped it. The lights glowed, flashed wildly, then died. In the total darkness, I could finally see out the windows. The street lights in the parking lot were dead, too, but the moon was bright, casting a sick pallor over the street. I reached for my cell to dial the police, but my battery was drained. My heart was pounding in my ears, blood running thick and hot through my head. I fought with my breathing, managed to calm down some. I rummaged in the dark for a weapon, anything to defend myself. I heard a knock on the door outside. I froze. I'm out here, Henry, he said, muffled by two sets of thick glass security doors. I crouched low. I knew he couldn't see me in the dark. I know you're in there, he said. It's okay, I'm not going to hurt you. He waited, scanning the darkness. My eyes adjusted, and finally I could see his face. He was pale. No, not pale. Looking closer, I saw he was covered in stretch marks. Everywhere, head to toe. Thick and white, laced across his skin like scar tissue. He was mid-40s, well-dressed, but soaked with rain, covered in dirt and leaves and brambles. He was barefoot. You don't have to let me in, he said. I just want you to see me. His eyes were soft, calm, not at all like those of someone in the throes of psychosis. He was steady, resolute. He waited for a long while. I waited for him to leave, but he stayed, leaning meekly against the doorframe. I don't have any weapons, he said, turning out his pockets. He took off his jacket, shook it out, still heavy with rainwater. He double-checked the address. Peered inside, again. Henry, look, if you'll just. He doubled over, clutching his head, clenching his jaw. He tried to bite back a scream, but it burst through his teeth as he fell to the ground. The lights flashed back to life, blinding me with their brightness. I fumbled with the corded phone, dialing 911 over and over, but only static hissed back at me. Outside, I heard a roar erupt, enormous, too terrific to understand, miles away but rushing closer, blue shifting, like a train down the tracks, like a wall of water in a tunnel, like a dark planet screaming right toward us, burning up the atmosphere, like silence. The lights went down, again. Even the moonlight was swallowed by the darkness. Still frozen, crouched behind a computer chair, I became aware of another set of frantic breaths, louder than my own. He was there, collapsed on the lobby sofa, steam rising off his mottled skin. His lips were cracked, eyes bloodshot. He tried to vomit, but nothing came. He stared at me, only a few meters away. He was spent. He was broken. I stood up slowly, clutching a table lamp as a club. I made my way toward the door, still locked. He followed me with his eyes. Please, he said. I have to go, I said, voice loud and shrill. I fumbled with the door. He reached for something in his pocket. I braced myself ineffectually. He produced an envelope. My driver's license, he said, and a letter. For my family. This part of the story is hard to tell, because it's hard for me to understand. I am a very different person, writing this, than I was at that time. But the person I was at that time lingered, there, in the doorway, when I could have left. I was a fool, but I was young, and twisted up inside, and I lingered. I watched him cautiously for a few minutes. He didn't move a muscle. I took his envelope, put it in my pocket. I sank slowly into a chair across from him, next to the door. I know you're feeling like you have no other options, I said. But the fact that you came here tonight, through that storm, just to give me this, tells me how much you care. About your wife. About your kids. About everything you have to leave behind. He smiled. His teeth were cracked and bloodied from gritting them. You're a good person, Henry, he said. His smile faded. I'm sorry to make you my witness. It's never too late, I said. Did you take something tonight? I checked my phone. Still dead. You could say something took me, he said. A few months ago. Maybe further back. Maybe it's been with me always. What took you? I asked. I eyed the landline in the phone room. If we had a name for it, I wouldn't be here. He said, "You're right where you need to be," I said. "There are resources. I can arrange them for you. They do work, you just have to be patient." He waved me off, growing impatient. I could see his strength returning. "I'm not suicidal, Henry. Please just listen." I settled in. "Do you know what a fluke is?" he asked. I paused, thrown by the question. "A sort of stroke of luck? A fluke is a small worm. A parasite," he said, "that burrows into snails." "Oh," I said. "From there?" he said. He grimaced. I heard the phone in the other room whistle. "From there," he said, "it changes the snail's behavior. Makes it go out during the day. Out in the open. Climb high, where birds can see it." As he talked, I became aware of my eyes losing focus, seeing double. I rubbed them, blinked, trying to adjust. I realized my vision was fine. Looking at him, it was as if he was shifting, drifting loosely through space. He noticed me staring. He coughed, snapping himself back into focus. "The fluke wants the bird to see the snail," he said. "Because once the bird eats the snail, the fluke can infect the bird. That's where it really wants to be." The snail was just a stop in between. His grip on reality seemed increasingly tenuous. As his image shuddered, once again, I grew worried about my own. "You're saying you feel like a bird?" I asked. He smiled. "I'm saying I'm the snail. So what's the bird?" He laughed. I heard his laugh echoed, 3 times, 4 times, as his image fragmented. He clutched his temples, fighting it off. "I just want a witness," he said, voice disjointed. "My family shouldn't have to see. And they shouldn't look for me. This way, at least you'll know what happened." The lights clicked on. It was quiet for a moment. We locked eyes. His were wide, brimming with tears and blood. Resigned. Grateful. The windows cracked, the light bulbs blazed and popped, and the roar returned, deafening, growing louder, so close, rushing in from every direction at once. I ducked for cover, not knowing where to go. I watched him, on the couch, breathing hard, bracing himself for whatever was coming. It was then, I think, that he saw it. Or it saw him. The look in his eyes changed from determination, to doubt, to abject terror. He tried to run. He sprang from the couch, limbs fractured through space, distorted like a funhouse mirror, flailing everywhere at once. He ran howling to the window, throwing himself against it, bouncing off, over and over, until he broke through the glass, crawling past, raking himself over the tempered shards, over and over, desperate to get away, desperate to get through, to get back to our side. I was given 3 months leave from the hotline. I didn't come back when it was done. I couldn't go back to that room. When the police got there, they could hardly believe all of that came from one body. It was easy for them to rule his death as suicide. The police delivered the note to his family. It made no mention of the thing that really killed him. I never sought them out. I knew I couldn't be convincing. To this day, I don't know if I did the right thing, if his lie was really more comforting than the truth. Despite all the times people asked me why I worked at the hotline, nobody ever asked why I quit. The answer is written on my face, etched into everything I do. After that night, I didn't sleep for weeks. Over time, I was able to tuck the experience away, make a neat little corner for it in the back of my mind. I moved away, started a new career, and put that life behind me. I sleep well, now. I have good friends, family, self-acceptance. After that night, I stopped living inside my head, trying to suffer enough to feel like a good person. I started working on the empty spots inside myself, and stopped filling them with other people's pain. I sleep well, now. If anything, too well. Once in a while, especially if I'm sleep deprived, or if I've been drinking, I'll catch myself sleepwalking. I'll catch myself wandering in the dark. No farther than my living room, or sometimes my kitchen. But I can't quite explain how I got there. I'm seeing a sleep specialist this week. A parasitologist after that. Anyone who might be able to help. I'm writing this here, For those who will know me by my story, they should know what came before, if indeed my worst fears come after. When I close my eyes, all I can see is the terror on the face of a man who was too proud to ask for help. I see in his eyes the reflection of that great something that came for him, anyway. I'm not going so quietly. Story 15, Depression plays tricks on the mind. It comes on in waves. One day I can feel some semblance of normal. I go to work, socialize, come home, rinse, repeat. Then the next day, or in some cases the next minute, I'm sitting on my couch in complete darkness, not remembering how I got there and unable to move. That's when the sadness washes over me. I can only describe it as sadness, anyway. It's as if I'm drowning, really. Like water surrounding me, pushed up against my chest like a weighted blanket, my head bobbing up and down, sometimes dipping under the waves. And I can't save myself. And no one else will save me either. I have clinical depression, among other things. I was diagnosed when I was 12 after several failed suicide attempts and dozens of concerned calls home from my guidance counselor. The following story is 100% true and happened to me very recently. The day started off fine. I was off from work and had made plans before to clean the apartment. I made a long list of things that needed to be done. But I found myself feeling heavy a few hours later. Great, I thought. The depression is starting. I tried my hardest to stay out of bed or off the couch. It was still the early afternoon, but in my mind the room got dark around me. The couch manifested its own gravitational pull, and before I knew what was happening I was sinking into the cushions, my head lolling back and feeling like my innards were replaced with wet cement. The drowning sensation started. I knew to just let it wash over me. It would pass. It always does. My eyes drifted to a corner of the living room. Several hours had passed and now it really was dark. I'm not particularly afraid of the dark, but I had this overwhelming sense of dread. Like I was being watched, cliché as it sounds. I'm a woman, and I've lived alone for nearly 10 years and I still can never shake the feeling that someone will break in at any minute. I continued to focus on the corner of the living room. I couldn't really pull my eyes from it. Something in my mind started whispering to me. Get up. Please get up. The voice begged me. I started getting scared. I've urged myself to get up before during previous episodes, but that's because I had really important things to do and I really needed myself to snap out of it. But this was strange. I wasn't urging my body to do anything. The voice seemed to come from nowhere. My eyes stayed on the corner. Please. Get up. Turn on the lights. Darkness. I couldn't move. I glanced over at the clock on the microwave. 10 p.m. I had been sitting here for 10 hours. Out of the corner of my eye, something scuttled from the corner. Get up. Turn on the light. I felt the couch sink in next to me. Turn on the lights. My eyelids got droopy. I felt heat on my body, like someone was sitting real close to me on the couch. Get up. That voice was real. It wasn't in my head. It was right next to me. I screamed. I woke up the next morning. I felt like I had just had a really vivid nightmare, but brushed it off and got ready for work. I began to undress to get in the shower and kind of stopped in my tracks. I was covered in big green and purple bruises. I've been trying to rationalize what happened to me. Was it sleep paralysis, something I also suffer from, a night terror brought on by the stress of the episode, or something paranormal? Or I could just be crazy. Any thoughts would be appreciated. Story 16, #infhash. Tell us a little about yourself. Well, what would you like to know? I'm a 30-year-old hospital counselor that is currently working in data entry. Long story for another time. I live in a small town in Texas that barely has 200 people and spend most of my time writing, working, and taking care of those close to me. Besides working, I enjoy reading, and comic book collecting. By that I mean Calvin and Hobbes, Peanuts, Dilbert, Garfield, The Far Side, etc. You name it, I probably have it. Well, what's the data entry story? Haha, cut to the chase, did you? Well, I worked as a hospital counselor for at-risk teens for the past 3.5 years. However, about a month ago an electric fire burned down the private clinic where I worked. No one was hurt, but the clinic will take quite a while to repair. Discreetly slides oily rags and lighter away from colorblindness. For the short term that meant I was without work. Got a small claim from insurance, but not enough to last long on, and so got a job in data entry. Not what I want to do, but it will do for now. I loved the counselor position and I hope to get back to it one day. In the meantime I will be happy with whatever hand life deals me. When did you first become interested in horror? When I was young I wasn't allowed to watch R-rated movies, something about corrupting a young mind or some such nonsense, so instead I watched older B-movies that didn't have ratings. I guess the no corruption plan backfired a bit if you wound up writing horror. Was there a specific moment you knew you wanted to write in that genre? I have to admit, writing has been a passion for me ever since I was little. Monsters and mystery seemed easiest along with sci-fi. I think one moment that outshines any other was I wrote a short piece for a friend of mine and he told me that it was the scariest thing he ever read. After that, I fine-tuned my skill to understand horror better. Where do you find inspiration? Have real-life experiences ever made their way into your work? Honestly, my mind sometimes goes at 50 miles an hour, thinking up story ideas. My parents say I had an overactive imagination as kid. Played with Legos, did creative puzzles, anything to stay alert mentally, and I also read a ton. I devour books like they are food. If I'm not reading, then you know something is definitely wrong. Yes, plenty of my work has been drawn from real life. One that comes to mind is concerning the story Thank You from Your Child's Kidnapper. This is based on a real-life experience where I received a mysterious letter at my duplex that I had just moved into. It was addressed to the previous occupant and was clearly from the mind of a deranged individual. I reported the letter to the police, but that moment never left my mind. Years later, took it to craft a strange little story about how far one would go to regain what they lost. How did you discover No Sleep? What prompted you to begin writing for it? Long time lurker here, haha. I found out about No Sleep when I read The Spire in the Woods as a book from Amazon. I was so stunned that this was a work of online fiction, and I started following No Sleep as a lurker for years. I started writing there because I loved the atmosphere of the role play and the community involvement that it encourages. It's something that makes No Sleep unique and engaging. You never know what sort of story you might read, and it made me challenge myself as a writer, which is something I always enjoy doing. What No Sleep stories and/or authors have had the strongest impact on you? Besides the previous one that I mentioned, there are several stories that come to mind that make me wish I was a better writer myself. Not in any particular order, here are a few of my favorites. I'm trying to sell a chair, a package marked return to send, a letter from the girl who watched you grow up, a talking crow taught me to fly, here comes the child bride. And now my trifecta of awesome authors that have affected my writing. U/by Fell's Disciple, U/Life I Strange Me Too, and U/Dopamine. What is the most terrifying thing you have personally experienced? I don't want to get too dark, but I've experienced a lot of tragedy in my life. I lost my mom when I was barely a year old to cancer, and lost my grandmother the next day. Never knew them. Lost my close friend in a car accident when I was about 13. But personally, likely the moment I almost drowned when I was swimming in Dallas at a friend's pool. I thought I had mastered my fear of water. I was wrong. There was also a time I had staph infection in my leg and almost lost it. Had to take nearly 10 needles in my leg to prepare for a nurse to dig into my leg to get the infection out. Much of your work deals with the concepts of life after death, immortality, and how the living are affected by the people they have lost. Does this history of tragedy influence that outlook? It certainly does. A wise saying that I follow is those who have struggled, have lived. Suffering shapes us, it can define us. It's actually the entire basis for the motto on my homepage. Horror happens. It happens every day to hundreds of thousands of people that we may never meet. The writings of loss and tragedy that I write can touch many, many people that I will never encounter. And if my view on these important topics can help another person make it through a hard time, then I've done my job. You've designated a universe of your writing as modern Lovecraft. His literary approaches included recurring locations and themes, and the work expanded to include other writers. How do you see your own fictional world developing? I have in fact plans for this world spanning all the way to the end of this year, which include introducing locations, and other writers. I will be making the call for support as the theme of the first season becomes clearer. The first season will include 10 series, and when we reach the halfway point I think a theme will be apparent to the stories. There are several subtle nods to other works sprinkled throughout your writing. Something sinister is happening to the prisoners at Kingsport Correctional, for example, slips a Lovecraft reference into the title. Is this a way of pulling other writers into your work? Definitely. The Easter eggs, recurring themes, locales, people are meant to encourage a connected universe similar to how something like the MCU is done. Each part can be done separately but also tie into the grander scheme of things. Is your goal in creating this mythos to write one unifying narrative arc, or will the interconnected stories be ongoing and indefinite? That's a tough one. Yes, there is a narrative arc, but sometimes elements that I mention in certain stories don't come up again for a while. There will definitely be an ongoing and expansive narrative being laid out where the main plot is laid out, but also other stories could be told. For example, at the end of the story, 8 Unmarked Graves in Dunwich County, it is revealed that Stephen from the Kingsport story is now actively recovering files for the organization he works for. The files stretch back decades, so there could be any number of ways to use this to create new story paths. How much creative control would you give to hypothetical collaborators in your mythos? There are certain high points I have mapped out that I would want to ensure happen. But in regard to using the characters and concepts, as long as they stay true to form, I wouldn't be against others stepping in to fill in blanks or even create new aspects to the mythos. A collab of this nature is a team effort, so as long as we come to an agreement on narrative structure and focus on what each story is trying to add to the mythos, I don't see a problem with the narrative being expanded beyond what I alone come up with. Speaking of collaborators, why did you encourage so many people to ruin Disney for all of us? Ha Disneyland. Well, I noticed a trend on No Sleep about the Magic Kingdom. First, everyone always picks Disney World and it usually involves the supernatural. I, along with my good friend U/First Breath 1, agree that it was time for a change. That's essentially really in every aspect of what is considered a trope. If you are tired of seeing the same old thing, be the change you want to see. It can really lead to more creativity when you do this. Have any of your stories ever involved research? If so, what was involved? The one that springs to mind immediately is for services rendered. In the story I wrote about an encounter with a Romanian demon. I looked over tons of web articles, took out library books and checked Google Maps to get the feel correct for a place I have never visited. Same goes for my series about my best friend in high school confessed a crime to me. While very meta of some aspects of my life, a lot is fictional and I had to look up streets, parks and even distances in Twin Falls, Idaho to make sure I got the details right. Every story takes some measure of planning, but I think stories like these that go the extra mile really are appreciated by the audience. Other than Lovecraft, what are some of your biggest influences from media? My favorites were the monster movies like Godzilla or The Creeping Terror. Universal monsters have a special place in my heart, as does Vincent Price. To me he will always be the Duke of Darkness. As I grew older my tastes expanded to a variety of horror, my favorite being psychological or dread-inducing, and then I have a special place in my heart for The Thing because it helped me see that the unknown can sometimes be the most frightening thing of all. Other than writing, what are some of your hobbies? What other creative mediums do you enjoy? I enjoy playing some video games, especially role-playing games like Final Fantasy or Zelda. I have tried my hand in developing some computer games and some drawing when I was younger. I found out quickly that I'm not a great artist. I dabble in it from time to time and it seems the style of comic strips is the one I can handle the easiest. As long as I don't draw their legs. Don't ask. So you don't actually enjoy spending your free time dining at French restaurants with the mysterious hive mind babes? Depends on how hot they are. Ha ha. Actually I love eating French and Italian food, but my favorite is probably Mexican. I like women the same way, spicy. You're a frequent contributor to /r/2sentence horror, a sub for micro-sized scary stories. What do you find most appealing about writing that form of extreme flash fiction? Do you find the length restrictions hinder or encourage your creativity? I like constrained writing because it makes you think outside the box. It's the same reason I like to scour r/writing prompts for ideas. Writers shouldn't be afraid to expand their ability and skills. Flash fiction to me has a balance of humor, horror, and a twist that you don't see coming. Any restriction on writing to me encourages me to think about why do I do things the way I have been doing them. By thinking outside the box, it really helps me think deeper about longer stories. Anything that keeps my mind active to me is a resource I don't want to just ignore. You've taken part in numerous collaborations with your fellow No Sleep authors, and are a regular participant in /r/No Sleep teams. What do you most enjoy about working with other writers? No one gets where they are without help. And on No Sleep, it is such a pleasure to find people with the same tastes and styles that I have. Personally, I want to thank you /Heong for encouraging me in the early days and telling me I wrote good stories and had potential. And to the other writers who have reached out to me and helped me learn how to make a name for myself on No Sleep, it's truly humbling. We're all in this journey together, and if we can't help each other, then we might be wasting our time here. We writers need each other. No Sleep teams is a whole other monster, and it's an amazing experience to see how others think and then to reorganize your thoughts to mesh with them. I hope to continue to contribute as much as possible. To the teams I have been on with you /Discord_and_Dine, you /Geronimo III, you /Tumage, you /Pocket Oxford, you /Unkempt_Skullduggery, you /Connor Wrights, you /Atleastum Genre Savvy, you /Millis Minion, and any I forgot. I love working with new people and hope to continue to meet new ones to work with in the future. Do you ever explore writing other genres besides horror? If so, what other styles of writing? Which do you prefer? I've written a ton of sci-fi and actually find it to be considerably easier, especially from a third-person POV, like novel-length stories. As far as which I prefer, I would say, I like the stories that have a personal impact on the reader, where they will make you feel something that you can't experience any other way. How much time do you spend writing in an average day or week? Do you have any rituals that help you focus? I make it a habit to write at least 1,000 words every day. It may not be anything significant, but it gives my brain a chance to unwind. When I write, I can focus on all the crazy thoughts that run through my head from that day. Usually I devote at least 1 or 2 hours every day. Generally, if it's on my mind, I will write it down. That way I don't forget. When crafting a piece of fiction, do you generally start with an outline or simply begin writing? Outlines do start first in my head with a general concept of what if, and then I go from there. A lot of my stories focus on the mundane aspects of life and then insert something horrific or otherworldly. Once I have an outline, I will craft a plausible title and then start from the beginning. Although my outline will focus on major points I want to hit in the story, I also like to surprise myself and let the writing simply feel natural. That way I can still come up with fresh ideas as I go, and I feel this makes the writing seem more like a conversation. Are there any topics you feel are too controversial for you to address or that you prefer not to explore in your writing? As much as I have body horror, intense gore and infanticide in my stories, you would think not. But I don't write about pedophilia or necrophilia ever, and I never intend to. I refuse to let my mind even consider having those topics in a story. Several of your stories touch on child abuse, and you've previously mentioned your interest in the case of Candace Elmore, a child who died during a controversial attachment therapy session. Do you think your work with at-risk youth factored into your interest in that gruesome topic? Has it played a role in the way you write child characters? Petscop. Have you watched Petscop? No? I'll give you a few moments to go watch it and then we can talk. Done? Okay. Children are innocent. More often than not they are victims. I think the reason I write about them is because it's a topic that makes people uncomfortable to admit that it actually happens. But it does. Every day. Not trying to get preachy, but I don't think I could write about an evil child. Because it goes against the norm. Not saying I won't, just haven't thought of a way to do so. Children see the world in a different way, and they are so trusting, and once that trust ends, childhood does as well. My job definitely has played a role because I have seen so many kids and teens suffer from stress, suicidal thoughts and abandonment that it is definitely a subject I feel drawn to because their stories need to be told. As for Petscop and the case of Candace, I think reality can be far scarier than anything horror can conjure up. I hope one day I can write a story that powerful that will affect people's viewpoint and maybe change their thinking. What are your feelings toward no sleep's immersion/believability rule? What impact, if any, do you think the suspension of disbelief format may have when transitioning your work toward a mass audience unfamiliar with no sleep? The immersion and the way that writers use real time to their advantage makes no sleep feel like the old-style serials you might see in a magazine or newspaper. Suspension of disbelief I feel is necessary in any form of media, whether it's for writing or movies. Any story done well should incorporate the feeling that the story could potentially be real, and if you're lucky it can have a further impact on your audience than you ever anticipated. So switching to a different format wouldn't really change the way I write. I think it would more than likely allow me to use the no sleep format to make other writing more impactful. Do you have any favorite reader reactions to your writing? Oh wow, where do I start? Can I call out names? Is that allowed? If so, here you go. You can take my life but you will never take my containers. You/flying kiwins out you fowie my bones. You/NAMBOO beautiful. So worth digging through the spam posts. My hat is off to you, sir. It felt chilling and I have a new fear of worms. You/social little bird fuck the ocean. You/fucking_ash oh my god. General reactions from a lot of stories. What the f did I just read? Well, f me. You/Byfel's disciple. Damn it, the thought of this being real. I can't. You/suspect084 I can't tell if I'm touched or seriously disturbed. That means you do a good job. Great story. You/dental spider 100/100 This story is the best thing I have ever read. What story or project are you most proud of? This is a tough one. I think it would likely be the story entitled I Was a Ghost for 53 Years because I was considering a way to work around one of the rules on no sleep, where the protagonist must be alive, and I realized the way the story flows could easily overcome that rule. My growing mythos is one that I am especially proud of when readers make connections or see Easter eggs that I place in the stories, and it's a project I feel I have a surplus of avenues to explore, so no worries on running out of ideas, at least not anytime soon. Another personal achievement I am proud of was writing a 24-part 24-hour story during the purge. Although lack of sleep was not fun, that was definitely one of the highlights of the purge. What were your feelings on the purge overall? Do you think no sleep should ever have another one? I wish more people had done horror and not wasted their time shitposting. It was like being given the keys to the kingdom and wasting all day throwing turds on the wall. If we ever do another purge, I think the one rule should be no shitposting. But anything else should go. Sci-fi, third-person POF, fantasy, fanfiction etc. It would be fun, just no shitposters. You've been hired as the casting director for a series of movies on your work. Which movies do you include, and who do you cast? That's a tough one. Surprise surprise, I have a list. For each work here's a cast of the crew I would include. The Drowned Graves. Bryan Cranston as Uncle Randy. Miles Teller as Will. Dane DeHaan as Charlie. Lucas Still as Rob. Lily Collins as Liv. Emma Watson as Marcy. I Was a Ghost for 53 Years. Bryce Dallas Howard as Jesse. Kiefer Sutherland as Byron. Ben Hanish as Ryan. Kylie Rogers as Chloe. A growing need to die. Charlize Theron as Margot Purifoy. You wrote vomit. Why did you do that to us all? You liked that one, did you? Smile, don't lie, it made you cringe. That's actually the start of a pure gross horror story I've got planned. To be honest, the reason I wrote it is because I wanted to push the limit on how gross could I go. I haven't gone as far as possible yet, and yes, I hate vomiting too. Disgusting. And I have a weak stomach. So why not write about it? Jots down weak stomach on a list that appears to be titled Colorblindness Vulnerabilities. Hey, while we're sharing things, what's the story behind 330, the number you use to link to your subreddit at the end of your stories? It would appear that is not in our database. If an item is not in our database, it does not exist. Staring contest ensues. Colorblindness emerges victorious. What's the most valuable lesson you've learned since you began posting to nosleep? Titles, 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 and timing. These two things mean so much as to whether or not your story will do well. An opening line needs to draw your audience in and intrigue. And if you use ambiguity in your writing, don't make it too confusing or you might lose your audience. As a successful author on nosleep, do you have any advice for new contributors? I'm not sure I would consider myself successful, so you flatter me by saying that. First piece of advice is don't stop writing and don't depend on upvotes. You will see it said 1,000 times, luck is a major factor to nosleep, and I believe continuously posting will help you to make a name for yourself in the community. Write about what you personally have experienced and write about things that interest you, and always seek the help of others. I think the best way to learn is by those who have come before you. What are your short-term and long-term writing goals? Short-term goal, finish my first horror novel. It's 90% done but still needs fine-tuning. Long-term goal? I would like to participate in another massive event the size of Alphabet Stew and maybe branch out and get a few of my older sci-fi novels published. I figure a reputation of work that is good doesn't hurt. Community questions. From /u/onyxoctopus, what's your favorite kind of dog? What's your favorite flavor of ice cream? How do you take your tea? What kind would you like? 1 lump or 2? How many snickerdoodles can I get you? Are you warm enough? If not, I can get you a hand-crocheted Afghan. Would you like one? Black heart. Snorky. Cookies and cream/banana pudding. With my hands. Anything with cinnamon that's hot. Heaven's sakes, is that a spot? How many snickerdoodles can you carry? No. Yes. Submitted anonymously. Are you actually colorblind? As a matter of fact I am, and it's not easy to explain, but I will try. Most colorblindness is genetic and it can be different for every person that is affected by it. Did you know that there are some versions of colorblindness where they actually don't see any color at all? It affects men more often than women, and it can be difficult, ranging from a daily activity like watching a traffic light or being uncertain whether or not your steak is ready. But for some, perhaps the biggest frustration is not being able to pursue the career you always dreamt of. Many arts-based careers such as design can be nearly impossible for those with colorblindness, while some such as being an Air Force pilot simply aren't allowed. From /u/uabo, what's your address? I still need to send you your package. You know what, you're right. I keep forgetting to give you a call too. Can you come outside and we can talk? I'm right outside your door. How long have I been here? I fail to see how that's relevant. Yes. Yes, that is a pool of pee. Did you bring the package? Good. You never saw me. Submitted anonymously. Which of your stories has been the most difficult to write, and why? It's a toss-up between The Day I Flew Standby to an exclusive story I wrote after my grandmother passed away. Having to post every hour on the hour for a 24-hour period and maintain consistency was hard. But losing my only grandma that I ever knew was harder for other reasons. Still, it's good, I think, to challenge yourself to write things that are hard for you. Submitted anonymously. Who are some of the underrated writers on nosleep? In no particular order. u/Scott_Savino, u/The Inspector, u/Kryptonivich, u/Epatp, u/ChrisBird93, u/AsDeathBeckons, u/Androons, u/AdeladiofthPasture, u/Grey Lavender, u/MythologyLoveShora, u/TuckandRoll93, u/Mkelly, u/TuckandRoll91, u/Uibio, and several others I know I'm forgetting. Submitted anonymously. Who is your favorite author and why is it /u/firstbreath1? The way they write is fantastic and have a great way to churn out hits in a regular procession. Each story is stellar, with compelling characters and intricate plot twists that you don't see coming. I think I have read every single story they have ever written except for a few older pieces, but honestly it amazes me to see that sort of quality content come out on a regular basis. What's that? We aren't talking about Timothy Zahn? Oh. From /u/Blair Daniels, what inspired one of your hit stories, A Growing Need to Die? I don't wish to disappoint, but the concept of eternal life is something that is constantly on my mind as far as a scenario. I wanted to explore this in depth and discover how it could lead a person to lose their grasp on what was truly important. It causes discussions to be formed about what we as humans value and how to make life meaningful. I think the idea for a story about an obsession with death is similar in some ways to the old obsession people had with living forever. Submitted anonymously, what book made you cry hardest, Where the Red Fern Grows or Shiloh? I'm kind of a softie. More movies make me cry than books, to be honest. Musicals especially. From /u/Bifle's Disciple, what do you think is your most underrated story? Your most overrated? I will have to be tough on myself for the overrated one and choose to answer it first. My Tamagotchi Is Still Alive was an unexpected hit and I wrote it in less than 10 minutes, so it shocked me to see that one do so well. As for underrated, I am certain every author has a few. First one that comes to mind is an older story called Lucky, and another story I loved to write was The First One Is Free, but I'm always happy when even one story touches one person, so I can't be too picky. From /u/Poppy_Moonray, I'm still not entirely certain /u/Bifle's Disciple, and /u/Blair Daniels aren't secretly one person. But for the sake of this question, we'll assume you're not. What pieces of their minds, or bodies, if you wanna make it really weird, would you Frankenstein together with your own to create a terrifying sentient amalgamation capable of ruling all of No Sleep in its scaly, talon fist? Bifle's mustache is an entity all of its own. I wouldn't dare disturb its eternal slumber, even for the sake of conjecture. Blair has lots of kids and ghosts in her work, and Bifle also frequently has wrinkly old perverts. Given this information, I envision the creature would be a black slime old perverted ghost that feeds on children. Wow, that's the best idea I've come up with for these 3 accounts. Now which one to use? If you were granted omnipotence for 1 week, what would you do? 1 week seems like a short period of time given the godly powers I have already. But for the sake of this question, let's assume that I am mortal. First thing I would do is figure out why are tomatoes fruit and who decided to name Switzerland such a funny name. After that, I would ride on a dinosaur and create a few thousand planets to watch for amusement. Days 2 through 7 would probably be spent repeatedly eating anything I wanted without gaining weight and playing video games without interruption. What fruit do you empathize with most strongly? What fruit fills you with an unbridled fury? Kiwis are so tasty they don't get enough love and are constantly forgotten in the produce department. Plums on the other hand just don't taste quite right for me. Something is missing. Some key ingredient. Some secret sauce. Maybe I'm wrong and maybe plums are better, but honestly I would want to see the two duke it out and then I will be satisfied. Fuck, marry, kill, go on a picnic with the No Sleep mod team. Yes. Many napkins are passed to colorblindness. Favorite boy band song lyric? Drag Me Down by One Direction. Submitted anonymously, what is the greatest album of all time and why is it Metropolis Part 2, Scenes from a Memory? Why is this question on every No Sleep interview? Who are you and why are you determined to find someone that loves this album? Submitted anonymously, If you made a list of your favorite James Bond actors, and you eliminated the bottom 6 people, what would that list look like? Daniel Craig in License Renewed. Idris Elba as the bad guy. Same girl from last movie. Same Q resurrect Judi Dench role as M from /U/Foolish Whim. What's your favorite fairy tale? Beauty and the Beast. Love the movie and love the musical. It's a classic tale of love and what really matters and teaches a valuable lesson in life. Also the songs are really catchy. Where do you find inspiration for your stories? I close all my windows in my house. I check the time to be sure it's about 13 minutes past 7 in the evening. The candles are lit. I grab my cloak and step into the cold chilly basement. The air is crisp. The sound of my steps is like ice cracking. There are spiders and corpses lingering near the bottom. I drench myself with the goat's blood. A dark shadow crosses my face and I know that the presence is already there. A scaly almost invisible arm reaches out and pulls me close. He opens his mouth wide and a million little tentacles sprout out. Then I write down what the voices in my head say. Actually, I usually read a lot, and then go on writing prompts or watch movies and think how could I write something or bring a personal spin to it. But that tentacled shadow sounds cooler, so I will go with that. Submitted anonymously. If you were able to spend the day with any figure in the horror community, author, director, actor, etc., who would you choose and why? Vincent Price. I would want him to read me bedtime stories. No matter what that man says, it's always going to give me a chill down my spine. And that laugh. Did he go to school for maniacal laughter? If I could just evoke 1% of that, I would be satisfied. Submitted anonymously. If you had to live in the established universe of any of your stories, which would you choose and why? The mystical world of Absifal I write about on r/sleep spell. Seems like it would be fun to live in. Riding dragons and learning dark arts in pre-K. That or the world of Christmas in July on Friday the 13th, cause it feels like a giant goofy video game. From /u/colorblindness. Have you ever wondered about the possibility of multiple realities, that somewhere out there is another version of yourself that is waiting for the time to end you and steal your identity? No, I haven't thought about that. Not until just now. Quickly goes to check life insurance policy. From /u/colorblindness, who is sexier, you or me? You. But only by a hair. Submitted anonymously. What question did you want to be asked that didn't get asked? Why are winged spiders scarier than swallowed needles? Want to keep tabs on you/colorblindness? Of course you do. Rather than hiding in his closet, which can be such a pain in the ass, follow him on social media. Facebook, Twitter, Reddit. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions, and thank you to you/colorblindness for taking the time out of his busy schedule of coming up with new ways to make us nauseous to answer them. We look forward to your future tales of stomach-churning terror. Want more interviews? Do you love cats and the ladies who collect and care for them? Then you should mark your calendars and make sure to return on Monday, September 3rd, when we grab our lint rollers and sit down to chat with you/the odd cat lady. While you wait, why not check those supposedly empty spaces, call your sister if you have one, and take a walk in someone else's shoes for a while. Story 17, My grandmother can time travel. My grandmother was the most important person in my life after my father died. She's the one that taught me about the curse. My grandmother and I have the same ability, a minor glitch in the universe that makes us special. We travel through time. Briefly, sometimes only 5 minutes into the past, then we lurch forwards, the weird tides of time dragging us along like rag dolls. Time traveling doesn't feel natural because it isn't. That was the first thing my grandmother had told me when I ran to her shivering. I'd told her that I had seen my dog run through the house even though it had died 3 years prior. She stroked my hair and told me that it was our cross to bear and that it tended to skip a generation. She had been praying it would die with her. It was only the bad things that replayed. I don't know why. Maybe we had sinned in a past life or we were being punished for our wicked thoughts. My grandmother had thought this was the case until I came along. She told me from the beginning that what was done and that nothing could be changed, but from the moment I knew I had the curse, I tried my hardest to break that rule. The first time it was a moth. It had caught itself in burning candle wax and I tried to free it as it flapped in pain and terror, but it was too late. I felt the familiar jolt of discomfort as I was taken, the curse sliming down my throat and into my stomach. I was back again, watching the moth struggle in silent agony. This time, I knocked the candle over, trying to spill it out. The moth gave a few weak flutters and then died on the table. I tried again. I tried 12 times, and each time the moth would die again and again. All I could do was watch. I gave it a few more seconds sometimes, but the consequences after made me less inclined to try my experiments. It would start off with 3 cuts on my hand. Identical, straight, deep lines. The harder I tried to save the moth, the deeper the cuts would be. My grandmother sat me down and told me with patience that we could not change anything. The universe, when experiencing disruption, would fight back until that disruption ended. Or we ended, whichever came first. I'd go shooting so I could purposely feel that sickness as I was dragged through time. I wasn't proud of it, but I'd find the most bloodthirsty group of people I could and sometimes we'd shoot animals that we wouldn't even check were dead. We'd just leave them there, alone in their final moments to choke on their own blood. I started with trying to aim the gun somewhere else the first time I came back. That didn't work. The cuts were deep and agonizing. I tried shouting to alert the animal, and after 3 months of trying, it almost worked. The deer bolted, and the bullet sank into its leg before another hunter finished it off. It wasn't much, but I had done something. I think my grandmother knew I was training myself. My father had died in a car accident when I was young. It had been an unfortunate coincidence. If it had been a split second later the other car would have missed him. I lay awake at night burning inside with the thoughts of what could have been if he had been a split second later going to work. If he had forgotten his tie he would be with me. It would be such a small disturbance, such a small thing. I wouldn't believe it was impossible. So on a day like any other, I tried. I laid on the dark cold floorboards of my house and felt the tug of the curse around the edges of my mind. The wear of the floorboards melted away and I was in the same house, the same room. From below, I could hear the laughter of a child. The nausea was so sudden and overwhelming I barely even noticed the floorboard creak. You can't be here. The panicked voice of my grandmother made my eyes open. I need to stop it. I could feel the tears threatening to spill down my cheeks. My grandmother's face was stark white, her hands clenched on an old boxy TV remote. You don't understand. You don't understand. My grandmother had barely finished speaking when the laughter from the garden turned into screaming. Horrible, pained screaming like an animal trapped. It screamed like the deer when I had shot it in the leg. You need to leave. You need to go now. My grandmother was out of her chair and had run towards the door. The weird, overwhelming sickness was taking over my vision and it was blurring on the edges. I could feel that strange void pulling at me like 1,000 tiny hands over my body. The door frame shimmered like a road mirage and I gasped out, trying to form words, but I could feel everything fading. It had been for nothing. A searing agony racked through me as I was jolted forward. I curled into a ball, waiting for my bones to be spat out by time. Then, abruptly, it was done. I looked down at my right hand, where my right hand should have been. There was a neat, seamed stump that looked like it had been healed for years. Suddenly, the memory of hospitals and countless appointments barreled their way into my mind and I dropped to the floor, clutching my head. I barely noticed when my grandmother knelt next to me, cradling my head in her hands. There are consequences for fighting the curse. When you came back, I left the other you for a moment and you were just a child, you couldn't have known. The memory of me sneaking into the garden shed had almost formulated. I had been driven, felt this compulsion that I had to be there. I remember turning on the big saw I had seen my father use. I remember putting my hand in but why I tried to stop you. My grandmother told me quietly. She tucked her hand hastily under her shawl but I could see her missing thumb. It was neatly scarred and healed as my stump was. When you love someone, You never listen to reason. That evening, my father came over for dinner. He was older than I remember, more tired. The wrinkles on his forehead showed that he had not had an easy life since I had saved him. Over time, the memories of him being gone are fading. They're being blinked out like stars overwritten. The only problem is, they're being replaced. Every memory I lose of my father's agonizing absence, a new scar is added to my body. Sometimes it's only a small one, the memory of jabbing a pencil into my arm and not knowing why. My leg was the last big one, and I'm sure the other one will go soon. I think the curse is realizing I've taken him back, and it can't find my father anymore. Now, it is taking me instead. You can't change the past. My grandmother whispers, her arms around me. You can't change the past. Story 18, about my first night with the no-sleep man. So it was my typical Monday night, just got out of class and went straight back to my aunt's house to boot up my crappy laptop. I didn't really have friends, so I spent a lot of time on Reddit to compensate for that fact. I spent way too much time on the no-sleep subreddit since I was a little bit disturbed and wanted to read some creepy stuff. I also opened up a tab of r/creepy just for good measure, staring at sick images as I gaped in amusement. Time to settle into the rest of my life. I read through a ghost story, you know, psycho girlfriend stalks her ex and kills his entire family. Then one about Snapchat and how yada yada kills everyone. After reading No Sleep every night, I started to be able to predict the plot points, twists, and descriptions exactly. Yeah, he was dead the whole time, wowee. I said aloud since my aunt was passed out drunk in the next room. I stayed with her since my mother died in childbirth, and my father killed himself a few years after that. She didn't have much, just a 3-room shotgun shack. Her abusive shithead boyfriends made everything just a little worse, but what did I care? As it started getting late, I yawned as I read some gory ending where everyone was decapitated. That one was pretty good actually. Fuck you, I don't want to. I heard my aunt yelling from the other room in her drunken stupor to Jim, her newest in a line of ever-rotating fuckboys. Looks like it's gonna be another one of those nights. Until I smelled something rotten coming from the other room, just the faintest scent of it. I got up to poke around the room, looked under my bed, in the closet, opened drawers, and checked in the pile of clothes I never put away. Nothing. My aunt's belligerent ranting took over the house, but I could hear a high-pitched noise very quietly in the background, like an electronic piercing noise sound barely audible to human ears. Oh well, back to no sleep. I decided to open one more tab before heading to bed for the night, and it was a weird-sounding story. The No Sleep Man. If you see him, run. No Sleep Man? Really? Boy, these authors are really running out of stuff to write. The weird thing is that once I opened the thread there were only a few words inside, not a whole story. This isn't a story, this is a warning. The No Sleep Man is out there, and he's coming for you. Don't wait. Get out while you can. Yeah, a little creepy, but trying too hard. That's when the scent of decay overpowered me, and I almost vomited all over my laptop. It's like there was a heap of rotting flesh sitting right behind me. As I thought this, goosebumps spread over my body as the room seemed to freeze around me, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood at attention like a group of pissed-off soldiers. I was inexplicably filled with terror, sensing that there were 1,000 eyes drilling right into the back of my skull with a burning hatred I could never know. Why did I have to read scary stories in the middle of the night? Fuck. I'm just spooking myself, it's nothing. My imagination is getting the best of me tonight, or so I thought. But I was wrong, so very wrong. I just have to turn around, there's nothing behind me, right? I steeled myself to turn around, and God, I wish I hadn't. It was then I saw something I will never forget as long as I live. As my pallid face turned slowly, the sense of terror spiked through my gut. Out of the corner of my eye I saw a shape. A human shape? I turned all the way to face it and screamed at the top of my lungs. A burnt, twisted face with bulging, pulsating blood-red eyes stabbed at my soul, teeth pointed and grinning at me, making a horrible noise. Hee ha hey ee 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 ee. The thing screeched into my bones. Its face was stretched taut across its cheeks with a wretched smile, but loose and dripping past the neck. It stabbed itself in the side of the head and peeled off sections of the black tarred skin that flaked slowly to the ground. Blood seeped into my tennis shoes and burned my toes in agony. "Hello there, Jake," it said, casually playing with its raw, dead skin. "I'm the no-sleep man, a pleasure to meet you." It held out a bony hand with fingers far too long to be human. I was shaking so hard I could barely create a thought, let alone structure a sentence. Hello. I stammered through clenched teeth. It opened its mouth again, but instead of a voice, the sound of 100 screaming children echoed through the walls of the house. The shrill piercing noise went on for minutes as he stood to the ceiling of my room, but hunched over so his face was closer and closer to mine. "I killed your mother," he whispered into my ear, grabbing the back of my neck firmly and laughing. The touch of the no-sleep man felt like burning ice, but there was a quick rage flowing through me. "You didn't. You fucking lying fuck. I don't give a shit what you are, get the fuck out of my room." I screamed with short-lived courage before fear paralyzed me once again. "You've got some balls, kid," he seethed through his teeth. No-sleep man shrunk back down to my size, and his dripping burnt skin smoothed out over his bald head. His eyes yellowed and he smiled wide. "That's what I like to see. I'll see you again soon, Jake." He tapped my forehead with a flick of his claw and stepped back into the shadows, disappearing into the ether. My forehead was bleeding from where he pierced my forehead, and where he stepped into nothing a small fire sparked into existence, smoke curling through the room. Barely realizing what was happening, I tried to put it out with my bedsheets, but it seemed as if everything was instantly set ablaze by the ethereal flame. Soon my room bloomed into an explosion of heat. I had to warn my aunt and get out of here. Naturally, she was passed out drunk, so I dragged her fat ass as fast as I could outside her trailer. The thing was bursting with red, blue, and black smoke towers. As I sat in the cold dead air staring at the faces in the smoke, smiling, sneering, and laughing back at me, I knew I would see the no-sleep man again. I don't know why, or when, but that bastard wasn't finished with me. And neither I with him. Story 19, Once, I was hunted by killer bees. The invasion began in 1985, or so we were told. The headlines immediately caught our attention: killer bees found on southern border. These were the type of things that sparked the imagination of every child. It filled our heads with images of terrifying attacks and narrow, heroic escapes from swarms of deadly bees. It was right out a scene typically seen in every 80s action movie. But like everything else, the killer bees didn't live up to all of the hype. They weren't some mutant insect, birthed from man's reckless lack of respect for nature and the lethal and sometimes fatal consequences. No, that was not the case. The killer bees were nothing more than a byproduct of a dull experiment to create a crossbred species of bee capable of producing more significant quantities of honey. Instead, what they got was a very pissed-off little bug. A bug with an attitude. For what it's worth, the name was still pretty cool, and no one could deny they weren't a badass little bumblebee. The news kept them in the headlines just enough, with the sensationalized hype of their rapid progress from the southern border to hold our interest. Now, some of the reporting was educational at times, but nowhere near the countdown to doomsday as they teased. No, they weren't going plunge the world into some futuristic post-apocalyptic world where you made your way through the wasteland, spraying fire from a flamethrower to fend off swarms of ravenous insects. Although nothing like that would ever come to pass, it was those type of scenarios most likely reenacted in countless backyards, in the imagination of numerous children. Until then, the local news kept our interest high in the real world. Aside from the cool name, the aggressiveness of these bugs impressed us, especially when we learned of their ability to repeatedly sting you over and over again. Everyone knows that an ordinary bee can only sting you once. When a honeybee stings a person, its barbed stinger is pulled out of its body, disemboweling and killing the bee. At first, there were the rumors. Everyone was talking about it. To this day, I don't know if it really happened, but word spread fast about the dead puppy they found underneath one of the new school portable buildings. They said it had been stung to death. I do remember seeing a little stray beagle mix hanging around the neighborhood. I saw him not too long ago. He was a cute little puppy. It wasn't long before stories started floating around of attacks on people. There was the boy who unknowingly wandered too close to their territory while mowing the lawn. Or the immigrant worker who disturbed a hive with his tractor. We paid little attention to them and saw them only as stories one would tell over a campfire or on a sleepover. It was a Saturday afternoon. The weather was overcast with intermittent drizzling on a slightly chilly and dreary day. I was hanging out with my cousin for the day, who was pretty much my best friend at that time. His folks worked on Saturdays, leaving us to lounge around the house alone. I wouldn't quite say that this like any other weekend, it wasn't. It was the most boring weekend to have ever existed. There was nothing on TV, no movies to rent, no one around to take us anywhere even though it didn't really matter. We didn't have any money to blow. So, there was only one thing to do for broke kids. We could go into the creek. Behind my cousin's house was a wooded area of large trees and thick brush separated by a narrow but deep and rocky creek. Back then, the bed of the creek was full of life with fish and crawdads, frogs, and turtles. Today, it's more of a sewer line than anything else, but back then it was clean and bright. It separated my cousin's backyard from this amazing little boy's fantasy land. In those days, the creek served many purposes. For the older kids, it was an ideal spot to light up and get high. To the younger kids, it was a playground of endless wonderment only limited by our imagination. However, it had its dark secrets. It had a past filled with things best forgotten. Nevertheless, whether the stories were real or not, we all knew there were parts of the creek where you could be taken by those you were not supposed to take candy from. But we didn't concern ourselves with matters such as that. Today, the relief of this oppressive boredom took priority. We took a random path in the brush. It was deathly still and the shadows were much deeper that day due to the cloudy day. The only sound was the dripping of water droplets falling off the canopy of leaves. In spite of overcast day that subdued the color of nature, the green of the trees and bushes were vibrant. We followed the winding trail for a while until we found it. The path ended in a small clearing, and we were standing before a tall dead tree with a surprise. Instantly, the countless bees flying in and out of the tree's hollow caught our attention. Me and my cousin looked at each other, and a dimmed light bulb went off in our heads at the same time. We were thinking the exact same thing, let's get us some honey. Now, we weren't the brightest of kids. In our heads, we thought, if we could get to it, we could pull out thick, dripping, golden honey. Just like Winnie the Pooh did in every cartoon. Quickly, we started looking for something to stick into the hollow of the dead tree. We didn't have to look for very long when we found a large tree branch laying on the forest's floor. We lifted the long tree branch over our heads and roughly shoved it into the hole. We pulled it out, hoping we would see that beautiful honey dripping from off the branch's tip, just like the type of honey you could buy in the grocery store. We only had time to do this a couple more times before it happened. Does anyone remember that old comedy show? The one where they had this bit where someone was doing something stupid, and at the end, the scene would freeze and the voice of Morgan Freeman would say, and this was the moment when they realized they had fucked up. Need I say more? Now, it's funny how memory works. You sometimes don't remember things the same way it happened so long ago. Your mind can change or add things, or even cut portions out. It can embellish the memory, making it much more dramatic than what really happened. That's what I like to tell myself. The swarm burst out of the tree like a black puff of smoke. It moved like it was one single creature, in the shape of an arm with long fingers. My cousin, who was standing in front of me, took the brunt of the first wave. I immediately felt hot stings on my forehead, 2 on my hand, 1 on my neck, and 4 on my legs. It is a well-known fact that when a bee's hive is disturbed or threatened, it releases a pheromone into the air which triggers the hive's protectors into a frenzy. What is not well known, at least not to 2 10-year-old kids, is the radius of an area the pheromone can reach is up to 1.5 miles, and the number of warrior bees in a killer bee hive is triple the number of a typical honeybee hive. We tore out of the clearing as fast as we could. We crashed through the brush, not even bothering with the trail. Branches and thorns tore at our exposed skin while the bees pelted us with stings on our backs. The insects were so ruthless as they relentlessly pursued us. They were even stinging us through our clothes. Still, we continued to push through the thicket. I kept hearing my cousin scream out in pain and wail not far behind me. Not looking back, I yelled for him to keep running. Don't stop. Don't look back. Keep running. Each time the sharp bee stingers would penetrate my skin, it would inject a tiny amount of venom into my bloodstream. Now, 1 or 2 stings is nothing to be concerned about, unless you were allergic. At this time, I was at about 100 stings and counting. It was starting to get hard to breathe. This was not like from being out of breath from running. No, it was different. It felt as if I no longer had the ability to take in air. I felt like I was dying. I wanted nothing more than to lay down and close my eyes. The screams of agony from my cousin grew distant and faint. Before I realized it, the ground below me disappeared. I was airborne for a moment when I understood I had reached the forest's edge. I had reached the creek. I burst through the branches and leaves and went over the side of the creek and tumbled to the bottom. It was a portion of the waterway that was dry and free from water. I was bloodied and dazed from the fall. The world was spinning and unfocused, and I began to pant and gasp for air. I fell to my knees. There was no need to run. In the condition I was in, there was no way I could climb up the edge of the creek while being stabbed non-stop by poisonous little needles. I was trapped. I waited for the hot pricks of pain to begin again. They never did. I don't have an explanation why they didn't get me down there. I was told once that when a swarm is chasing you, the angry little bugs can only perceive their target in one directional plane. When I had suddenly dropped below the ground level, they continued to fly in the same direction, not realizing I had fallen into a lower plane. They flew right over me and didn't even know it. I looked up at the edge of the creek. Any minute now, my cousin would crash through the tree line's edge and fly into the sky from the sudden appearance of the creek. I waited, and I waited. I think there is still a part of me that is still waiting. There will always be a part of me that waits. I will never stop waiting. I will never stop waiting. Story 20, I heard my dead sister on the radio. I was desperate when my sister died in a car accident. I screamed, I cried, I fell into a deep depression. I have kids though, so despite the depression I worked harder on the mask to continue being a good mom who didn't traumatize her children. During the days and the weekends I had my children, I talked to them calmly about death, and when I couldn't hold it in I told them why I cried. There was a bitterness in me as I calmly smiled and explained the process of grieving. They were 4 and 6, so I couldn't explain crawling into bed and refusing to take care of them. I could explain that I was sad and I would cry a lot for a while until it quit hurting my heart so much. The weekends the kids were with their dad, I just laid in bed all weekend. Sometimes I would watch Netflix and sometimes my boyfriend could drag me out for a while with guilt trips about alone time, but I wanted to be left alone to waste away. It felt, still feels, like a limb had been amputated from my body, like a part of my history had been erased from the world. Worse, the world kept going, her friends moved on and her job was replaced. I am an atheist. Before this I didn't believe in an afterlife, but I wanted to now. I was looking for anything to prove me wrong. I started finding books and websites devoted to the afterlife and paranormal phenomenon. I didn't believe in ghosts, but I started watching paranormal shows revolving around haunted houses. I read as if I could find the answer if I just kept trying. It was an insatiable hunger bordering on obsession. That was about the time that the remake of Flatliners with Ellen Page was released. I went with a friend who lived out of town. I didn't want to be left alone to sit in the movie. There is a scene with a car crash that I was unprepared for, and I felt my breath catch and my eyes welled up with tears, and I gripped the handrests waiting for the panic to subside. My friend watched me cautiously. I offered what was meant to be a smile of reassurance, but it came out as a terrifying grimace with my eyes wide and wild. The worst part was that the movie never even addressed the afterlife. I call it my psychotic break, Those few months when I pretended to be fine. So my mind cracked as I dropped my friend off and I began the hour-and-a-half drive home. I started screaming as soon as I hit the highway. I gripped the steering wheel and screamed from the pit of my being. The sound of my pain filled the car and wrapped around me, turning into rage. I thought I would shrivel up as the sound left my body. I really thought I could not continue to live with this pain anymore. Then I started screaming at my dead sister. I knew it was an accident, but I was angry with her suddenly for leaving me alone and for everything I would have to do without her. The screams turned to yelling at her. I asked her why she had left me and I slammed my hand on the dashboard. I went through all the reasons I still needed her and I accused her of abandoning me and leaving me alone with this pain. When I was spent, I had driven about 20 minutes. I reached around for my cigarettes and lit one up. As I rolled down the window, the air hit me and rushed into the car. That was what made me think of EVP on my AM station. My hand trembled as I switched from AM to FM and cautiously hit the tune button until I heard straight static with little to no interference. "Carol? Are you there? Why did you leave me like this? How could you go? I need you still." My voice cracked and I went back to softer sobbing and feeling calmer, if not still a bit crazed. "I didn't leave you," came from the radio. I paused suddenly, flipping the rest of my cigarette out of the window. I didn't. You." There was a deep sob in the back of the static. I knew that sob. That sob came out of my sister the night she was raped after a 5K, when she tried to hang herself in the hospital room. That was the sob I heard when her closest friends deserted her during her divorce and froze her out, accusing her of being self-absorbed as she struggled to start over with nothing and the terrible credit her ex-husband had caused with his irresponsible spending. That was the sob I heard after she came out as bisexual to my parents and my mother told her she was going to hell. By now the phrase was repeating constantly and getting louder. Okay, you didn't leave me. But you're still gone and I can't handle this anymore. I was leaning forward now to be closer to my car stereo. My eyes flipped back and forth from the radio to the road. I was gripping the wheel so hard now that I could feel blisters forming. Did you get coffee? Did you get the coffee? Did you get the coffee? Again she just repeated, but I didn't understand. Coffee? I didn't get any coffee when we went through your stuff. Like a cup? Your friend took the cup we got back from your office. She went back to repeating the question for about 2 minutes. I wasn't sure this was actually happening. I thought I was experiencing a well-deserved mental break, or one of many that month. I hung on to this though. I didn't care if it was fake and all in my head. I wanted any piece of her I could get. Again, she got louder and more persistent with her question as I grasped for an answer. Then she changed the question from "Did you get the coffee?" to "Did you bring the coffee?" I could hear the exasperation in her voice and I realized what she was talking about. Every year on my birthday we went out for coffee. This year her death fell a month before my birthday. I got the exact same thing from every coffee place I ever went. Some variation of mocha frappuccino. My younger sister got something different though and I could never keep it straight. I had the great idea to get a coffee on my birthday and one for her. I would take hers to her grave and pour it on her grave for her and play a few of her favorite songs. It was a disaster. I was ill-prepared for this and when I couldn't think of what to order her I started ugly crying on the barista who looked around frantically for a savior. I shook and kept asking what I should get for my dead sister with my 4-year-old on my hip who was oblivious and waving to the people behind us and asking what their name was. She made a suggestion and I gratefully accepted the suggestion and paid. Then I ran out to the parking lot and cried some more. When it clicked I started shouting at my radio and laughing. Yes, it was me. I brought the coffee. I know if anyone had seen me on that highway shouting at the radio I would have looked like a psycho with a few shots of espresso and a waving cigarette. I love you. I love you, I love you. Repeating and I stroked the radio with my free hand and said it back. I'll save a bit of the back and forth and summarize. I asked if the man she had dreamt about a year before, who she had called the Grim Reaper when she awoke terrified, was actually the Grim Reaper, and she said yes. Most of my questions went unanswered. Then she started telling me to change stations and I would, and we would talk, mostly yes or no questions, with me talking about anything that came to mind before she told me to flip the stations again. After 40 minutes she broke in, "They're coming, quiet, be quiet, they're coming, quiet." She whispered through my radio and then she was gone. I tried changing stations and I tried calling her back, but I couldn't get anything that wasn't interference from another station. Then I heard a voice, almost like my sister's, but a little off. I shut the radio off for a few miles and then turned it back on and chain smoked the rest of the way home listening to static. I thought that was the end of that. I only tried it one more time with no success, but other than that I left it alone, feeling lucky that if there was more than I wanted to believe, that I hadn't invited it into my home. Then a few months ago I sat in a Walmart parking lot crying over my sister, less psychotic this time and my car still running. My radio flipped to AM and static screamed through my car. I jumped and went back to FM. My presets were gone. It was like my battery had died, but the car never stopped running. I stroked the radio and told my sister I loved her, assuming it was a fluke. Then it happened again and again. 4 times in the last 5 months. I didn't feel comforted like I thought I would though, it all felt wrong. I work 3 in the afternoon to midnight. Most nights I creep into the house like a burglar and quietly make my way to bed, sometimes stopping to eat on the way. A week ago I crept in and went straight to the bathroom. I shed my clothes and took out my contacts and crept into bed. My big pit/lab dog lay in between my boyfriend and, like she always does, and I faced the wall so she could curl behind my knees. I heard the footsteps in the hall first. I thought it was one of my kids going to the bathroom, and I waited for the light to turn on or hear the sound of doors opening or closing again. After a few minutes I dozed off and figured it was the dog before sleepily noting she was right behind me. It was at that moment I felt the blanket pull at the bottom. If the dog hadn't been laying on it, it would have been pulled off the bed. I was tired and told myself that I was dreaming. I felt it again and nervously rolled over. I put my hand on my dog's back and tried to sleep again, counting my breaths to a normal heart rate. Then I heard a growl and I snapped back awake. The dog. It was the dog, I told myself before realizing I had my hand on the dog and she hadn't stirred. A growl like that I would have felt. I switched tactics and called it a dream I was having while half awake. Then I felt the blanket tug again. I was more tired than scared at this point. I had to be up at 7 with 2 kids that morning and it was after 1. I defiantly pulled myself into a blanket burrito, tucking my feet securely and wrapping my arms. I had the blanket up to my shoulders and it somehow yanked itself down to my face. Somehow I fell asleep. Lately I don't feel like I'm alone anymore in the house. At night the dog greets me as I sneak in the door and whimpers as we pass the living room. I see shadows move and things are not where I leave them. I don't know what's going on, but I started having dreams about my sister again and she looks scared. I don't know what to do.